Welcome to the Board of Education's special meeting. Today is November the 12th, 2020. Getting close to Thanksgiving. We have a lot to be thankful for, but as I was driving into my office, I heard that some healthcare officials are suggesting that we really rethink Thanksgiving and that we think about who is going to be at the dinner table. We can always, and every one of my colleagues know that notwithstanding the fact that COVID is in place, we have much to be thankful for. Many of us watching and participating today still have our health, and we still have the blessing of tomorrow. So here's to a good week leading up to Thanksgiving. And what I mean by that on behalf of the board is that we, despite the challenges that we have, that we focus on the good things that are still around us, like family and friends and opportunity. Having said that, there's not much I have to do today, but there's lots that the board has to do. And so I will turn the agenda over to my colleague, Commissioner Beatrice LeBron.
Thank you. So I just want to preface tonight's meeting, just to let everyone know that I did have staff send out an email to set some parameters around tonight's discussion around the Dr. Jallo's recommendations for and plan for the fiscal. So I'm not sure if everybody got to see that before this moment, but tonight's meeting is going to focus on the shalls. Primarily, this is also in the email because the shalls are, I'm going to read this again, recommendations that represent actions that the board and the district must implement upon the plan being deemed approved. Failure to implement such recommendations will cause the district to be considered in violation of the plan and can lead to action by the commissioner. But in addition, part of Dr. Jallo's legislative, I guess, contract to both the district and to the state is that these shalls, if we disagree with the shalls, we have till the next public hearing to have conversations with the monitor publicly as to why we disagree with those shalls. And then ultimately the decision is going to be to the state commissioner on how we move forward. So I think those are going to be the most critical pieces. If there are parts of it that we agree, I think that throughout this year, next year, and the next couple of years as the plan extends to, that we'll have ample opportunities to have more in-depth conversation for each of the sections or areas as they are relevant to the conversation or to the committee. And some of these will fall under other committees, even if it's under the finance plan. So let me just preface by saying that. I actually will be right back, Van. So I'm going to have you start very quick because my timer is going off. So give me 1 second. And I apologize, but I had another district meeting right prior to this one. So I started dinner late. 1 second.
Okay, that was a surprise, just like yesterday was. And sometimes we do our best to adjust, but I can't adjust on that kind of notice. So we'll just have a little dead space because I don't know how, I know exactly how I think I understand how she wants the meeting to proceed, but I'll just wait for her to come back. Ms. Wade, were you going to say something?
I see Commissioner Powell has her hand up, so perhaps that will.
Yep, Commissioner Powell.
Actually, my question is for Commissioner LeBron.
Oh, okay.
She's back.
I'm back.
All right. I didn't do anything. It's the place is just as you left it. Go ahead.
Okay, so my hand was up because I have a question before we start. And
Yes.
This is a serious question, requires a serious answer. Why should this body afford you, Commissioner LeBron, the smooth and productive meeting after you essentially threw hand grenades at President White for a full 40 minutes and then retreated to your bunker of no video, no audio? That 40-minute tirade included Trump-like assertions without any evidence.
First of all, I'm definitely no Trump. I don't want to have this conversation. If you have an issue with hearing this meeting, you can take it up with President White, who initiated the conversation between staff and myself to do this tonight as the chair of finance, which you are not. You don't need to afford me anything, Willow. We can either get through this productively or we don't. Your conversation, your questions, your comments are relevant to me. We're either going to focus on what we need to focus on tonight and keep it moving, or you can have that conversation with your president. It's not your job to defend President Van White. But that's your problem. You constantly believe that
haven't
you are the defender of Van White. You are not. I promise you, you are not the defender of Van White. So we can continue to keep it moving. So next up.
Question that requires a serious answer.
That is your serious answer. It's none of your business. How about that? That's your answer. Now we can keep things moving along to focus on what we've been elected to focus on. And right now, it's this
So we're not prepared
that the monitor has put together.
They failed to recognize that we had.
That's it. That's it, Willa. That's it. We're not going to have this conversation. You're not, it's not your job to defend President Van White, nor is it your job to monitor how I conduct myself. It's just not your job. So
You made it
focus
clear
on your job.
for
Did you
40
read the
minutes
report?
that
That's
you
what we're here tonight
going
to
to give
discuss.
President White
That is what we are here to discuss.
and his process a
Read the
chance
report.
for
Did you read the report?
not only did you have,
Read the report.
but you had contempt for the
Did
work of
Read
They
the report.
the shorthand
We're here to
worksheets.
discuss tonight.
Like Donald Trump, you have contempt.
You're Donald Trump. You're Donald Trump. Let's talk
That-
about the decisions that have led us here fiscally.
The
Willa.
adopt order for fast, smooth
We have this conversation.
of the
You've
duties.
been on the board for 20
Trump,
years as an ineffective board member.
You to follow
Ineffective board member 20
while
years.
you of
And you're
decorum.
racist.
While
So you want to have this conversation,
And
we
we,
can have all this conversation right now, right here on this floor. Let the community know how you're racist, Willa Powell. Let them know how your decisions have impacted Black and brown.
President White,
Lady-
President White, and we,
Commissioner,
And
commissioners.
Oh, you want to stop me now when I'm bringing out the
Commissioners.
truth, but you're not going to try to stop her when she's trying to defend you?
Now, hold on.
We can have this
Hold on.
conversation. I'm ready all day, every day.
Commissioner
Let's go.
Powell and Commissioner
Go
LeBron,
ahead, Van.
Commissioner LeBron and Commissioner Powell. First of all, Commissioner LeBron, I interrupted. I was letting you all get it out. It was independent monitor Shelley Jallo who asked me to speak up. You are incorrect to state that I was interrupting in the benefit of Commissioner Powell. The independent monitor said, President White. That's when I chimed in. Now, Dr. Jallo, no need. This is how we're going to proceed. Every member of the Board of Education, without regard to who they are, has the right to have the floor and complete their statement. And then every board member, including Commissioner Powell, Commissioner LeBron, has the right to respond uninterrupted. Those are our rules. Those are parliamentary rules. No matter what a person says, whether we like it or dislike it, whether we think it's timely or not, a person has the floor. They have the right to complete their statement. And by the way, Commissioner Powell, once you finish, I am going to make sure that Commissioner LeBron has an opportunity to respond. I would ask that everybody abide by the code of conduct that we have as board members, by the parliamentary rules. That means that everybody will have a chance to have the floor uninterrupted, and then a person will have, if they choose to do so, have the opportunity to respond. I would add, though, tonight the mission is to review the financial plan. However, having said that, a board member has the right, upon recognition, to speak uninterrupted. Please let Commissioner Powell finish. If you choose to respond, Commissioner LeBron, you will have every right to respond. Commissioner Powell.
On Tuesday, the 40-minute tirade included Trump-like assertions without any evidence whatsoever that other board members came to the meeting unprepared. It included a failure to recognize that we had an obligation to go through every recommendation item by item so that the public had a full understanding of what the state monitor was asking us to agree to. You made it clear for 40 minutes that you weren't going to give President White the chance and his process the chance to demonstrate not only you, and in the process you demonstrated your contempt for him as the chairperson, but also contempt for the hard work of the staff that compiled that shorthand worksheet. Like Donald Trump, you have contempt for the norms that organizations adopt in order to foster smooth execution of their duties. And like Trump, you rely on others to continue to follow the norms of decorum when the tables are turned and you become the chairperson responsible for the orderly conduct of the board's business. So, absent an apology for wasting 40 minutes of our time on Tuesday night, why should we give you the courtesy of following norms? Why? Let me be clear. I am confident that the board will conduct itself in a manner consistent with the code of conduct, myself included. We will afford you the respect of the position that you refuse to grant others. But it is important for the viewing audience to understand that you have waged an asymmetric war. When we give you respect of the position of chairperson, we are taking the moral high ground for the good of the people's business.
Commissioner LeBron, do you care to respond?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, these are not Trump-like tactics. I'm not a racist, and nor have I been someone to come in and disrupt people, Black and brown in particularly, which Willa Powell has been directly responsible for over 2 decades on this board, making incompetent decisions as a board member. That's not me. That's first and foremost. Second, I didn't ask to chair this meeting. I was asked to chair this by the board president. If you have a problem with that, take it up with him. You don't need to respect me. I have zero respect for a racist like Willa Powell, and I will not respect anybody on this board that I feel are sellouts, are not here for Black and brown children, and I'm not doing their due diligence. I don't need evidence. This community knows who comes to these board meetings prepared and who doesn't. I don't need to present that evidence. You present that evidence when you ask questions that have nothing to do with the subject at hand, and it's clear that you were not prepared for this meeting. So no, you don't have to afford me any quorum or decorum. You don't have to follow any of the rules. I am not going to afford anything to Willa Powell specifically, so she can miss me with that. And we can either focus tonight on what we're here to focus on, which is the fiscal plan, or we can end the meeting and be done and not go through it. And the community has a right to hear all of this and have the opportunity to read it, and they will do so at the public hearing. It's not the community's job to sit here and waste time while you guys are reading it one by one. You're not even reading the report. You're reading a cheat sheet that the staff created. That is not the report. That is not even the implementation. And when I went back, I did go back and review everything that you guys voted on. You agreed to everything. You went point by point without reading the implementations, which have some serious consequences and some tight timelines, and agreed to all of it. You don't even know what you agreed to. So with that, I'm done. We can continue and keep it moving unless anybody else has their hand up and they want to say something.
Commissioner LeBron.
Because we're not going to be here back and forth all night, because I will leave and you can chair this meeting, Van. I don't need to waste my time wasted on this.
Commissioner LeBron, I am going to respond, but very briefly. I want to say to you and to everyone else who might have missed it, Commissioner Elliott was ill and was unavailable to chair yesterday's meeting. And so I was asked at the last minute to chair that meeting. You described that as a meeting in which I put out the format and I decided what I would do. What I did is I did what any good colleague would do. When a commissioner was unavailable, I agreed to chair the meeting. The format that was created was not created by me. In fact, I praised it then and I will praise it now. Our staff did a good job at putting together that sheet that summarized the very lengthy and in-depth recommendations by Dr. Jallo. I thought it was informative, I thought it was helpful, but I want to clarify something for the record. You keep on saying that this is how Van set this up. I heard about the fact that one of our colleagues was not able to chair the meeting, and you could literally ask the clerk. It was shortly before the meeting began. I assumed the responsibility of chair so that the conversation could go forward. The reason why I believe it made sense to have it Vice President Elliott chair it is because she is chair of ESA. It was an examination of the academic plan. So when I suggested at the end of the meeting, and I didn't get any objection from you, that it made sense and it was appropriate that as finance chair, you chair this particular discussion of the independent monitor's financial plan, that made sense to me. I had not heard from you then or I have not heard from you now that you did not want to chair that. I just want to clarify. You seem to think that I created the agenda for yesterday. In case you missed it, I didn't go into a lot of detail, but one of our colleagues was not able to chair that meeting. So I only did what was given to me. And by the way, I want to repeat, I think the staff did an excellent job of preparing for that conversation. This conversation may be structured a little bit different. And I trust that you have, given your experience as chair of finance, that you have the capacity and ability to put an agenda forward so that we can get through this. That's why I said, Commissioner LeBron can do this. She's chair of finance. That makes perfect sense to me and still does now. If you don't want to, and I don't suspect that's what you're saying, then let me know and then I will chair it. But you didn't say anything yesterday and you still haven't said anything today. So I assume that's what you want to do. And the other thing that I would note is that I heard you say yesterday, and you said it again today, you're assuming, I'll just speak for myself because I can't speak to other people. I'm not anybody's boss. I don't check in on them. I don't see what sticky notes they put on their notes. You keep on repeatedly asserting that people did not read the substantive materials. I can only speak for myself. I did, Commissioner LeBron. I also happen to value what the staff did last night. So please, I can't, no, in case people don't understand, I know you do, no one reports to me. As board president, whoever the board president is, they don't report to their colleagues. So I can't tell you that Commissioner X and Y and Z read pages 5 through 9. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professor. I don't, no, that's not in the bylaws for the board president to do. I can only speak for myself. And with respect to your statement that board members, and I assume you're including myself, did not read the requisite materials, that is wrong. And I'm surprised, unless you've spoken to board members, I don't know how you would know that, but you certainly didn't talk to me. And I'm telling you now, just so that you know, I did read the materials, and I read the materials yesterday, and I read the materials today. And I think you're right. I would agree on you on this last point. Let's go ahead and start focusing on the academic, the financial plan, and get through with it, however you deem appropriate. Thank you.
I'm going to respond. And so I just want to be very clear that this is on record, that you said you read it. And when we get through the implementation stages of what Dr. Jallo has put in her report, I want to bring this on record back up for this community to hear and listen that the board agreed to these implementation procedures. So I just want to put that out there because I think there are things in the academic part that our community and our teachers will be upset about, but you agreed to it. So I just want to put it out there that the board agreed to it and Van read it and he agreed to it. I have some serious doubts based on the way that the conversation was had yesterday, but we can move on.
Okay, all right, let's move on.
Let's move on. So
please.
I'm gonna first bring up the first finding for the financial piece, which says that the recommendation is review the fund balance policy for modification and approval by April 15, 2021, and that effective June 30th, 2021, which is the budget cycle that we're going into, the district shall adhere to the current fund balance policy by committing to yearly increasing the fund balance. So we do have a fund balance updated policy that we are going to give everybody at the next finance meeting so people can have 4 weeks to review it so that we can start having conversations on it at the next finance meeting in December, because this is something that we have to move forward with, but also if you look at the effective date that the monitor has put as shall, that is going to be coming up for this budget year. So I want to highlight that. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but that's an area of shall that I think is going to present potentially some conflict for the board.
Commissioner LeBron, are you looking at the participant screen?
Yes, I pulled it up now.
Okay.
1 second. I see Willa Powell and President White.
I disagree with the timeline. I don't believe that we should make any plan as part of our 21-22 budgeting to increase the amount set aside for fund balance. I think we need to have a conversation explicitly about that, about either maintaining or waiving the fund balance policy for the 21-22 school year. I say that because the uncertainty of the state funding is such that it's impossible to know whether we can put any more money aside for the savings. The concept behind a fund balance is you put a little bit away for the years you really need it. What we don't know is whether this is the year that we really need it. You don't take grocery money and put it in the cookie jar when your children are starving. And we do not know the state of affairs is sufficiently uncertain that it may just be necessary to waive again the policy. And when we do that, we do it as we did last year. We did it explicitly by vote, a decision to waive the policy. So I don't disagree with the finding. I do believe we have a policy for a reason, but there are reasons why one waives policy, and I disagree with the timeline.
Dr. Jallo, I'm not sure if you wanted to respond to that before I go on to President White.
So I want to make sure I understand. You disagree with adhering to the policy you have in place. You disagree with the timelines. You disagree with reviewing your policy that you have in place now as well.
I disagree with making a commitment as part of your action plan at this time under the existing unknowns. I think that that's a situation that we need to be fluid on.
Okay, so I want to be clear. You do have a fund balance policy. Is it your recommendation that it's not followed?
It is my expectation that as the revenues and expense streams become more clear, that we will make that decision as part of our 21-22 budget. Right now, that is the policy. No one's suggesting that the policy be revoked or disobeyed. But if it becomes necessary because of a lack of revenue to waive the policy, that is an option at the disposal of the board.
Okay, we'll just have to keep that on the disagreement column.
Well, I just want to clarify if all the board members can weigh in, because if it's more than 4 board members, then that's something that we'll have to discuss publicly at the hearing for the commissioner to weigh in on.
Commissioner LeBron, I have a really quick question.
Yeah.
Are you going to use the voting options at all? Just for us as we're recording?
We can. I don't think I'm a co-host on this meeting, so I'm not able to, I don't know if I'll be able to see the results.
You'll be able to see them.
Okay.
We made sure that you weren't a co-host because that way you'd be able to vote yourself.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So President White and then Vice President Elliott, before we take an official yes or no on the tab.
Yeah, just a procedural question. What we did yesterday is we used the yes and no buttons, and Rahima or staff observed the count and indicated whether there were 4 votes or not. I just want to piggyback on some comments that Commissioner Powell made. I did note, in a significant part of your report, Dr. Jallo, that there are major uncertainties regarding revenue. I think it's on pages 8 or 9 or something like that. And you detail in an excruciating way the many ifs that are out there in terms of the state funding. Most of our revenue, of course, comes from the state, and that the city's revenues have been flat for 14, 15 years. So let me be clear. I'm not saying we should not have a fund balance policy and that we have one. Not saying we should not have one, but like any policy, it's subject to review and amendment. I am concerned that, as I think what Commissioner Powell is saying, is that we're committing ourselves to yearly increases, I think is what you're recommending.
Well, that's only from your policy.
And that's what I'm saying. With it, any policy can be modified and changed, or we can waive it for a particular year. And my concern, and I think this is Commissioner Powell's concern, that with a budget forecast, as you have accurately described, of not knowing what the revenues are, deciding that you're going to pay your RG&E bill 3 years in advance, when in fact your kids might not be eating, could be troublesome. So that's the observation. It's not a rejection of your recommendation.
No, I don't take it as a rejection. I'm saying for me, right? For me to move forward, given the timelines, when you disagree with something, if you want to give rationale, that's fine. But if you can give the contrary or opposing or alternative recommendation that you would like to see replace this, I think that would be very helpful. It's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to say what you want to replace it with. And right now, this language that I'm using right now is only language that comes from the policy you have currently. If the recommendation is we like the policy, but we want to change the dates, or if the recommendation is we want to waive the policy, then say that and we'll put that in there, and then that's something I can consider when we move forward.
So I would say that's fair comment. And that's one of the reasons why I think the approach that the staff put together, modified by our understanding we would talk about the shales, is a good one. And I also think this is why you need time to really deliberate, but I'm not asking for more time from the state. What I will do, I'm sure Commissioner Powell might do it as well, we'll get back to you on how we think that might be modified somewhat. I think I'm glad to hear you're willing to hear what a counter proposal might be before just saying, well, we're just stuck at opposite positions. So I imagine, given what Commissioner Powell said, we'll think about that and get something back to you. So I don't know in terms of logistics, whether at this particular point, I guess I would vote no, but that doesn't mean I'm rejecting the concern that you've articulated.
So just for clarification, Dr. Jallo, if there are 4 yeses and 2 noes or whatever, however, as long as we have board majority, is that something that then gets hashed out in the public hearing, or you just have sidebar conversations with commissioners who opposed it? Looking for clarification, because we're hoping tonight to also anything that is disagreed upon then becomes a subject matter for the hearing.
I don't have a preference one way or the other. I would only ask that we keep it as concise given the timelines that are before us, and where these 2 documents have to be by December 1st. So I'm open to either way that you think is most appropriate.
Commissioner LeBron, on this particular point, I don't have any, given the votes, but I don't have any problem, as I indicated, speaking to Dr. Jallo and seeing if she and I can reach some accommodation, and then presenting that during the hearing or to the board at some other time.
There's a board majority of yes. I don't think it needs to be a topic on the hearing because there's no disagreement from the board majority.
But
we're just on the first one. I'm just figuring out how we're going to move forward.
Yeah. Well,
at the hearing.
Well, I hear what you're saying. So as I indicated, I would just speak to Dr. Jallo, and if she and I, having some additional conversation, are able to reach some accommodation, then maybe that's brought to the full board. Maybe the full board doesn't have an objection to that change. I have serious concerns about us stocking away money when our children aren't eating. That's obviously figured, but I can discuss that with Dr. Jallo. I see the board vote. That's cool. We can move on.
Yeah, actually it's Commissioner Elliott has her hand up, Commissioner Malloy, and then Willa Powell.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I really am in favor of us adhering to the policy. The reason being, at some point, we have to get in a healthy financial position. And while these are very difficult times, I think if we're looking long term, we actually have to, in my view, adhere to this policy. And there may be some other cuts that have to be made, but for the health, the financial health of the city school district, I think it's important that we adhere to the policy. I really don't think it's sufficient time to try to debate this matter. We just have to adhere to what we already have in place. I'm just looking long term. And I'm looking even after, many of us will not be around in the future, how are we leaving this district financially for those commissioners who are going to come behind us, for our staff, for our students? I believe it's important for us to bite the bullet and adhere to the policy and to make the increases year over year. We're in a very vulnerable position, and particularly given the pandemic that we're involved in. I just think it's so important for us to sacrifice even more, unfortunately, to ensure that in the long run, in the long term, for generations to come, this district is in a sound financial position. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. I just wanted to express agreement with Vice President Elliott. Although I have questions or concerns about some of the recommendations, I am in agreement with all of them at this time. So it's a yes for all of them for me, but I will be bringing up concerns as we move through the document.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Powell.
Okay, so the issue, certainly Commissioner Elliott, what you have said is a valid point, but the counterpoint to that is that we serve as agents of the state, and the state has an obligation to fund us appropriately. And if as a result of a failure of the state to adequately fund us, our kids have to suffer while we put additional money aside for some future day. That's like the argument of whether we focus on our graduating seniors or our pre-K 4 grades to ensure that they have a strong foundation on literacy. It should not be an either or. It should not be that we either ensure that the children we have in our pipeline right now, in seats in front of us right now, get a proper education, or that we put money aside so that some future generation of children can get a proper education. Those are false choices. Now, to address Dr. Jallo's concern about specific language, my suggestion is that the recommendation includes something like, if in the event that the board determines that the policy should be waived, that it be done in explicitly and not implied. And what I mean by that is last year, our last budget year, we waived the policy explicitly by resolution. Prior to that, it was done sort of understanding that the budget that was presented to us would raid the fund balance instead of explicitly approving of that decision. So it was a decision made as part of the vote for the budget. But if we have a standalone vote, then we're essentially acknowledging the trade-off that we're making.
Okay, I don't think I see. I think these are old hands, and I can't clear hands, but I see.
Mine was a new hand, actually.
Mine was a new hand too.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to actually call on Ricardo Adams because his hand was up too. And then Commissioner Malloy, President White, and then Vice President Elliott.
So I just want to say ditto to Vice President Elliott. I'm in agreement that from my experience, my little experience, we adapt to anything. Since December, laying off all them teachers, COVID showed up, we adapted to that. I don't believe we're gonna leave our kids out to dry. So I'm in the same ditto with Vice President Elliott. For that reason, we do adjust and we do adapt. I'm done.
Thank you. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. This is just in regards to what Commissioner Powell had said about this being either or. Although I agree with a lot of what you said, I don't believe that this is just an either or situation. You know, our district's very survival is at stake here. And just, I want to provide a little more background about accepting the recommendations. You know, I accept all of the recommendations with the caveat that we do need to implore the state to please consider the fundamental inequity in how we continue to fund our schools across New York State, where a disproportionate level of need exists within impoverished districts like the RCSD. And although we have declining enrollment and a need to restructure in a variety of ways, especially relating to student placement and the managed choice policy, the proposed state withholding of aid will have a disproportionate effect on our district compared to more affluent surrounding communities. We know the causes of this disproportionality. It's a history of redlining and subsequent segregation, further socioeconomic segregation by public schools being funded by property tax revenues, and a foundation aid formula that needs to be revisited to more readily meet the unique needs of our students. We know how we got here, so that isn't a debate. However, the proposed withholding and our lack of savings or fund balance puts us at a distinct disadvantage to other districts. We've already had to make significant cuts in staff, and we cannot continue to scale down without detrimentally affecting our ability to provide quality programming to our students. Our scaling down must also be matched by state assistance during this emergency period of time. We are asking for help. Poor people are so often asked to scale down their spending. This attitude is cruel and implies that our students aren't worthy of nice things like their suburban peers, like quality programming and experiences that more affluent communities enjoy. So while I acknowledge and accept the recommendations made in this report, I implore the state to consider our unique circumstances during this time. Thank you.
Okay. Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. A couple of things I want to respond to. Let me just respond to Commissioner Powell. You know, since I've been on this board, we've been, you know, trying to get the state to provide equitable funding. They have not. And I think in part that has been, although this is probably an unwritten argument that they will make, we have not done our due diligence with the finances that we've gotten. And we always tend to say, I remember when the Rochester City School District budget was $300 million. Now we're $1 billion and we still can't educate Black and brown children off $1 billion. I mean, come on. So it has to be more than that. And so here's an opportunity for us to be creative. We're not going to have the financial resources because we want to make sure that we have a healthy, we're moving towards a healthy financial position in the district. But we've always used that argument that we need more money. We have to look at, because we're not going to have the money, how can we be creative in ensuring that the children are educated? We've said certain things that work for Black and brown kids, but that seems not to fall on deaf ears. And I'm looking forward to the superintendent to implement those kinds of things that make Black and brown children successful, which does not require money. And I think, Commissioner Malloy, while I appreciate that argument about Black children and people of color don't have the same kind of resources that white children have, I personally, I don't think that that's an argument that I'd like to make anymore. I don't care what they do out there in the suburbs. What are we doing for the people in the Rochester City School District? There's too much inequality in the suburbs versus in the school district. So for me, that's no longer an argument. How can we take the unique position that we have in the Rochester City School District and get the right, excuse me, and have the right resources appropriate to the work that we want to do in the district. Excuse me. So thank you very much.
Okay, I just want to point out though, everyone has had an opportunity to talk and we have 4 yeses that agree and 2 that disagree. And so this won't be a actual point of disagreement at the formal hearing for these conversations. So this pretty much, I don't know if anybody has questions around that, but that's board majority. Moving on to number 2, if anybody has any questions or conversations they want to have or disagreements with the language that is in the second recommendation.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yes.
Commissioner LeBron, I was on that list. You said you were going to call me. I know it's oversight. That's all right. That's all right. I did want to respond. I'll be brief. I did want to respond briefly to a couple of comments that were made. Commissioner Adams, you referred to the fact that we have always found a way to adjust and adapt. And I would agree with that observation. But if you look at much of this report, this plan, you will see that many of the ways in which we adjusted and adapted were wrong and made us even fall further behind and come behind the 8 ball. So I don't know that those methods upon which we adjusted and adapted will be available. So I know your argument. You said, well, we've always figured out a way to provide for our kids. But if you look at this report, it is seeking to prevent, and sometimes with very good reason, a lot of that ad hoc adjustment and adaptation that we were doing. So that leads me back to the reserves and the argument about, and again, I realize and I respect, I can accept the will of my colleagues, but I do want to make this point. So since we don't have the ability to adjust and adapt the way we did in the past, and this report points out why we should not be doing that, that leaves the reserves. And what's my argument about reserves? By way of example, let's say the United States Congress doesn't come through with COVID relief. Everybody across this country is saying schools in particular need additional relief. Well, let's say, for example, we can't get the new administration or the old administration to come through with COVID CARES Act 2. Where does the money come from? If we can't use those old methods, which were not good, we're not sound financial practices, where does that money come from other than our savings account or our ability to not put as much aside in our savings account? Now you would say, well, wait a second, why are we going to our savings account to do that? Or why would we not put money into the savings account to do that? Well, if you look at page 4 of the pamphlet that we received from our independent monitor, it defines what a reserve fund balance is. It says it's to help endure short-run fiscal pressures such as revenue shortfalls or unanticipated expenditures. So the very logic of saying, you know what, I'm not going to put away as much money into the piggy bank because the federal government is not coming through with CARES Act relief, and our kids need personal protection. We need thermometers. We need social workers to help these children with the trauma. I'm not going to put as much aside in our reserves because, in fact, you're still serving the same purpose. It is an attempt to make up for revenue shortfalls. Let's say they don't do COVID 2 or CARES Act 2 or unanticipated expenditures. That's COVID. So I don't want anybody to think that just because Willa or I or anybody else thinks, wait a second, let's not put as much money aside, that we're doing something contrary, because it's like that old commercial, pay me now or pay me later. You may need that money for CARES Act 2 because the federal government is going to give it to you. But what happens when they don't? Do you decide to go into your reserves? Or what happens if you don't have enough in reserves? Do you decide, wait a second, I'm not going to put 15% in this year. I'm only going to put in 3% because I got children that need to have thermometers coming into the classroom. I have children that need to have masks, staff that need to have masks. I need social workers. So again, I would say adapt and adjust. Our independent monitor tell us all this stuff that we were doing to adapt and adjust, it ain't gonna be available to us, and rightly so. We got to be greater fiscal agents, fiduciary agents. We can't do the stuff we used to do, shoveling around and playing the shell game. We can't do that stuff anymore. All we have left is strong fiduciary agents is to decide when and where we're going to get that money to make up the revenue shortfalls or unanticipated expenditures. But I concede the votes are there. I agree, Commissioner LeBron, it is time to move on. I just want to make that point. And any other point I have to make, I will share that with Dr. Jallo. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I see Ricardo, Commissioner Adams and Commissioner Powell's hands are up. I don't know if those are old hands, but I would like us to wrap this up for this. We're only on the first one. So I don't know if those are old hands.
Looks like Ricardo put his hand down, but my comment is for number 2, if we're ready to move on.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm ready to move on.
Okay, my comment on number 2, on page 20, it reads, the board and administration should refrain from continuing to allocate scarce resources to programs and initiatives that do not meet minimum standards by the district. I'm a little perplexed why that reads should. It seems to me that should be a shall or a must.
Dr. Jallo, do you want to answer that?
You can change it. You can make the recommendation to change it.
I just want to say, you know, the shoulds, we have the autonomy to either follow the recommendation of the should or not. So I just want to put that out there. I don't think nothing stops us, even if it says should,
From doing it.
forward. Yeah, from actually doing the recommendation.
My point is that this is a really big deal. And, you know, if we're going to take away the freedom of fund balancing, we better figure out how to tighten our belts. And that is by paying attention to those things that are not meeting program standards. And that goes hand in hand with a number of recommendations further on about doing program evaluations and making sure that those are part and parcel of the budget process. I'd like to see it read a must.
I think, yeah, so Commissioner Powell, but we are going to use the hands whether folks agree with the actual recommendation. And I don't know if we want to, I guess, take a second vote on changing it to should or shall, but.
So can I make a recommendation?
Yes.
What happened the other night is if you agreed with it, it felt like if you agreed with it conceptually, it was okay. And then Kalia actually this morning sent me something, you know, if you can insert this word or if you can, you know, so those edits, you know, were submitted to me this morning to make those adjustments. So, you know, if there's a wording there when you send it to me afterwards of what your recommendations are, we can do that then.
So we're going to use the yes, no for folks to vote. So I'm going to vote.
Thank you. And Francine is recording the vote today in lieu of Rahima. So please vote.
I just have a question. Am I voting still on the DL?
Yeah, correct,
Okay.
Superintendent.
Okay, thank you.
Are we voting on the language as is without any consideration of the alternative?
I'm voting with the language as is because it's a should, and the only barrier to that actually happening would be the board itself. So I don't have a preference of whether it should say should or shall, but Dr. Jallo just said that yes, the other day you guys voted on the, I guess, concept of the recommendation, and then she had additional feedback and edits from staff, from different board members as to what language should change in there. So right now we're just voting on the concept of the recommendation with the addition that you have requested to change the language to shall versus should.
Well, I think we did it in the flipped order, didn't we, Dr. Jallo, where we actually got buy-in on recommendations before we cast our votes?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking now. If people.
That's what I thought you were doing now.
Recommendation.
But that's not what you just described. You described what's on.
What I described is what was sent to me. It was sent to me after you conceptually agreed with something. If there was wording that you preferred to see, I got a chart that included any changes in the wording that you wanted to see.
And I just repeated that, Dr. Jallo, as we're
I
voting on the concept, and then we can move forward with additional feedback from different board members on the wording, and it can be added to this.
That's not what you said. I understood Dr. Jallo completely. What happened on Tuesday was that we had a discussion, however brief it might have needed to be, to determine whether the board was.
Willa, let me repeat so that we can move forward. People right now, I'm asking folks if they agree with this one or they don't. And if there are additional language edits that people want to recommend, then so be it. But I also started the meeting saying we're going to focus on the shall, because again, if there are issues with the shalls, those issues have to be worked out and discussed at the public hearing, which is happening next week.
And that's why
I wanted to focus.
Because I believe this should be a shall, not a should. That's why I raised this point. And that's why I think we shouldn't just glance right over it.
But there is nothing that would prevent the board, except the board itself, from actually doing it. That's what I'm trying to kind of, I guess, understand. I don't personally care if it's should or shall.
There is something besides the board. This is listed as district leadership and the board. If the board says, if
the board says to district leadership that they have to do this, then district leadership has to do this. That's it. I don't understand where the confusion is.
Because you're not trying to understand. You don't want to understand. It's a real easy.
It's not, it is easy. The board directs the superintendent to take action on certain things. If the board puts out to the superintendent as the board majority to get something done, that is on the superintendent and her team to get it done.
The easy part is you ask your colleagues whether they think it should be a should or a shall. That's the easy part, and you're glancing right past it.
Okay, well, I'm asking my colleagues if they agree with the recommendation as is, and asking the staff to put the recommendation that you've argued tonight. So that's the vote I'm asking for right now. It's a yes or a no on point 2. If folks can vote, we can keep it moving.
Is there a vote, Francine?
Well, we have 3 yeses and 2 nos. So it looks like we need, okay, now it's 4.
Okay.
4 yeses, 1 no. Let's see. We're still waiting for.
Yeah, that's me. I have not made a decision on that, but let me sort of lend to the conversation. I'm wondering if in fact it should be shall. But what I don't want to have happen is that it blocks us in if in fact we have programs for whatever reason, there's some rationale for them not meeting the standards by the district. So I guess I just want to have some leeway for that. So if somebody else has some conversation around the statement I just made, like I think it probably should be shall. However, I don't want to have it in stone, so that if there's some variances that need to be considered, that we don't take those variances into consideration. So I think my vote would be yes to leave it as should, that the way it's stated now, for those reasons.
Okay, so now we have 5 yeses. 5 yeses. Are you gonna, okay, so I'm including you, Vice President Elliott, even though it says 4. So it's 5 yeses and 1 no. And Willa has her hand raised.
I just want to reply to Commissioner Elliott that, you heard my argument on the first point, that yes, there are contingencies we don't know about, which so your position here is in absolute contradiction to your position on number 1. In this case, the question is whether we're committing our scarce resources to programs that don't work. Why, under what possible consideration other than political could there be to directing our resources through the budget to programs that have not proven to work?
Did you want me to respond to that?
Well, I'm just saying, because you say we don't know about contingencies, what?
So can I respond to that?
Please.
The reason why I wanted to give some level of choice is because the word all is used. And you may decide below a certain threshold, you don't have the capacity to examine all of them to that level. All I'm asking you to do is examine to see the quality of the services, scope of work, evaluation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why it was an opportunity to give you some level of flexibility. Are you going to do it with a $5,000 contract? I don't know. Should you? Maybe you should. But this would give you the leeway to say maybe under a certain threshold, you don't have the time or the manpower to do so. That was the original thinking. Do I think you should do it every single time? Absolutely. But you may not be able to. At least I just want to get the thinking behind it.
I do have my hand raised when you get to the.
Yes, Dr. Myers, I see Ricardo Adams, I see President White. So I'm going to call on you first, Dr. Myers, then Ricardo Adams, then President White.
Thank you. Just following up what Dr. Jallo said, I think just respectfully, we need to get into a process and know what the person hours and the person power is going to take to do this. So while I agree with Dr. Jallo, I think it is important for us to look at all contracts and programs. I think we need to get into the flow and see. It could become very daunting. And if we have a little bit of wiggle room here where we can at least look and see what that is and get up to that, I think it's a happy medium, but it keeps that awareness that that's something we have to include in our repertoire. Thank you.
This is basically a draft. Am I right or wrong? So with Kaya or somebody's typing in the suggestion, like one of the suggestions for this is, can we change it from should to shall? And so if we document that, we should be able to just document that, people's concern, and move on. I think we really might be later than I'm allowed to be late for work if I go at it like this. But I just think we should go by the documentation that's going on. It's suggestion, even for the first one. Dr. Jallo, in the end, you have the option to change whatever your proposal, what you wanted to do. So I just think that we need to try to be a little flexible with working this process here.
Thank you.
Van?
President White was next.
Yep. I'll be brief. We have been down this road many times over the years, and I know I've heard a couple of board members say, well, the board members didn't do this or that. Let me tell you something. We've talked extensively about our contracts and whether they're performing and whether we're getting value from the service of those contracts. And we have modified our budgets to reflect what the performance indicators are and whether the particular contractor, I can think back to MCC, some of my colleagues have been around for a while. MCC had a multi-million-dollar contract and it wasn't generating the promised performance indicators. So I would think, I understand, I appreciate Dr. Jallo, you're trying to give us some flexibility, but unless we get very serious about this, this is gonna continue on and on and on. And I'm a witness to that. And it's not because the board hasn't said something about it. We've repeatedly said that. And in fact, some of you have been around even more recently, know that we changed that budget book that Dr. Jallo you describe as not user-friendly. Well, it's gotten more user-friendly, believe it or not, over the years. And one of the things that we did is we insisted, and there were years in recent years where it didn't indicate, because we were insistent that if you get money from the district, indicate whether it's generating the promised results, right? Similar to what you're talking about here. And the year that we had that put in there, the next year it didn't appear. And people around remember me saying, wait a second, what happened to that part of the budget that described whether these contractors were doing what they said they were going to do? And there was some explanation and they ended up modifying it and putting it back in. So my only point is, I agree. I don't think this should be, and you want to save money? That's the way to save money, because there's a lot, it's a gravy train to a lot of organizations out there. They're getting money and they don't deserve it. And I'm telling you, and I have the budgets to prove it, we have addressed that, but we seem to fall back into this practice. So I think it should be a shale. But again, if the votes are there, the other thing I wanted to note for everybody's, guys may know this, but that when you vote yes, or you put yes or no, it gets rid of your hand being raised. So you can't, I didn't know that, you can't do it simultaneously. So Commissioner LeBron, when you call for the vote, make sure that you're done with the hand raising. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, actually.
Yeah, I didn't know that until just now. Thank you, I'm done.
So did you want to call for the vote again, or we did have 5 yes and 2 no? Are we good with that?
I think we're good with it. That was the only should that is being suggested that should be a shall. I just want to remind my colleagues, there's nothing that stops us from doing a should as a recommendation. And I think the monitor has been clear that there are shoulds and shalls, but that the shoulds is up to the board, whether we move forward with the recommendation. And although I support this should 100%, and I want us to move in this direction, this is a direction that we could have done on our own prior to this even making it into a report. So the next,
Beatrice?
Yes.
Just a point of clarification. Who's the 7th vote? If there's only 6 of us.
Well, this
Dr. Myers, because
Okay.
there's district leadership on there, so we wanted to have the opportunity for her to give input as well on behalf.
All right, thank you.
Chairperson LeBron, the procedural question, or it's not a procedural question, it's a question for Dr. Jallo. If this issue of should versus shall, if we didn't do a shall, there would be ramifications from the state. If we didn't do a should, there would be no ramifications to the state. Is that correct, Dr. Jallo?
Officially, that's correct.
Yeah.
So that would argue, and I'm done, we can move on, but that would argue, in fact, of considering whether something should be a should or a shall, because if we do a should, there's no state enforcement of it. If we don't do a shall, there is state follow-up. And the practice here has been on this issue that the board has spoken about. It's a gravy train. People get money, they're not held accountable. I gave an example of a recent budget, 2 budget cycles, where we were definitive about putting those deliverables in that budget book. The following year, they mysteriously disappeared. And then I pointed that out and they put them in. But you know what? If that was a shall, the state could have come in and said, wait a second, you were supposed to do this, you agreed to do this, and you haven't done it. It was a should. But anyway, I'm good.
Dan, I hear you, but I just also, again, want to remind the board that we are the people that are supposed to hold the people under us accountable, including the superintendent and her team. Like, I don't need the state to tell me what I should be doing as a board member, although they are involved now, and they're here. So Dr. Jallo's here, welcome. We'll work together, but I personally don't feel like we should not be in a position where we need someone telling us shall versus should. I'm gonna accept the recommendation. For me, this is, I can only speak for one board member and I'm speaking for myself. I'm saying that for myself as a board member, I accept the recommendation and my goal is to follow through with that should. But again, it requires the full board to work together to get this should met. And we don't need the state to tell us to do it, but I hear your point of argument as well. So the next recommendation that has a shall is actually number 3.
Here's the thing.
I'm sorry.
Given Van's example of our program-based budgeting, where it simply fell off the budget, here's my last argument why it should be a shall and not a should. When a budget is put together and the administration, and I'm not saying it's going to happen under Leslie, but if the administration fails to follow board guidance, policy, all of that, and does not put in metrics for program-based budgeting and does not give us the outcomes of those programs in past years in the budget, which is what our policy says. When that doesn't happen, are we going to, like, on the spot fire the superintendent? Are we going to refuse to pass the budget and miss the city's deadlines because it didn't do what we directed? We only have so much real control. But if the state monitor is measuring us on that particular shall, then I'd have a much greater level of comfort that the administration in all of those months leading up to a budget recommendation is going to actually include it in the budget, so we don't have to fight over it when the budget is in front of us for deliberation, because that's exactly what happened. As we had a go around about whether or not the program-based budgeting policy was being followed.
So I just have to point out that you mentioned the budget, but the recommendation and the evidence of implementation actually does not mention the budget. What it mentions is evidence as a result of frequent benchmarks of students' performance, research, student grades, and that we continuously examine these programs and contracts, and that it doesn't mention the budget. So there are multiple opportunities to review that data, but she does not explicitly say the budget. But I do want to move on to number 3, which has another shall, because we will be here all night. And I have to tell you guys now, I don't have all night tonight, and some of you guys may, but I don't. And I scheduled a certain number of hours to be here. After that time is up, I will be logging off. And if you guys are still here, then President White can take back over. But number 3 has some shalls. And I don't know if anybody has issues with anything that is in number 3 and the shalls that are listed in number 3.
I do.
Go ahead, Commissioner Powell, because I haven't pulled up the hand screen, but you spoke up first.
On the second bullet, on the develop guidelines for related service providers, this is, I assume, Dr. Jallo, this is about special ed service providers. How do you propose that we can build a budget around the documented need? It's not in the condensed version, but in your version, it refers to the documented need for related service providers. How do we know what that documented need is going to be when the IEPs aren't complete at the time that we do the budgeting?
One of the recommendations, there are 2 recommendations. One is about the development of, I believe, a special ed standard operating procedure book, and one for supervisors. Right now, you're having challenges with the services that are being provided, who gets which services, how the services are monitored, who's providing the services, how much you're paying for the services. And those are some of the things that should be included in an overarching document for people to understand. At some point, you have to look at the schedule in which you complete your IEPs, because you need that information to help you develop a more accurate budget. So at some point, we have to look at the schedule for doing those IEPs. But more importantly, this particular bullet speaks to knowing the guidelines when you have a particular designation. What are those different services that we provide for that identification? And somewhere, somebody needs to know how much those things cost, so one can look at that information and project a more accurate budget.
What if our service, if our IEPs were built around, were determined based on the cost of services, we'd be open up to a lawsuit.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm not suggesting that your services be built based on cost. I'm suggesting that somebody does know what they do cost. That's my suggestion. I'm not suggesting they're built on cost. I am suggesting that you need to know how much these services do cost so that you can make some more accurate projections when you start building your budget. Right now, it's a little bit, that's an area for improvement.
Okay, well, I do appreciate the need for guidelines. And I think I hear that you're saying that that only helps us with better projections, because the fact is we don't know at the time that we're building the budget what the which students will in fact need services of any given kind. All we can really do is look at trends and what it was this past year and make assumptions about whether they will continue to need those services in the future years.
Right. Yeah, it's just an area for improvement in terms of timing and in terms of projecting how much something might cost. You don't know exactly, but you can make some good estimates based on some better guidelines that everybody is following. That's another thing. We need some consistency as well.
Okay, so I'm gonna call for the yes or no vote now. People agree with it or don't agree with this shall, or the shalls that are listed in point 3.
Francine, let me know when you have recorded.
I just got 7 yes.
Thank you.
Number 5 also has,
So just a point of Beatrice, so
Yeah.
there's no number 4, correct?
yeah, I didn't see a number 4. It goes from 3 to 5.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Okay.
It might be a small typo.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm having trouble following this document. It was easier.
So I'm not following this document, Dr. Jallo.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
You're missing number 4. It went from
Yeah.
3 to
Okay.
5, Dr. Jones.
All right, we'll change that.
All right.
I'm looking at a more updated version. Okay.
So it skips to number 5 on the one that we were delivered. So yeah, there's no 4, but there are some shalls in here. And I do agree with this one. I just did have a question, Dr. Jallo, but I think some of my questions I will type up and email to you so that I can get a formal response. But I don't know if anybody has any questions on this one. If not, we can go ahead and take the vote now.
On number 5,
Yep.
I have a concern. Dr. Jallo, are you recommending that we do distributed budgeting? That the principals develop their budget? And if so, how on earth do we bring that in line with a balanced budget? Because principals are going to defend their budgets, to the last hill. And if cuts are needed, principals don't willingly accept cuts. How do you do distributed budgeting?
You can do distributive budget. I mean, you're going to have to build to a point where you want your principals involved in the budgeting process. They're the ones on the front line with the students. They're the ones that know their needs better than anybody at central office or anywhere else other than a parent. So they should be involved with the budgeting process. Are they going to fight for their students? Yes, that's what I want them to do. And then it's up to central office to work with their principals to bring those budgets in line with monies that are available. I I think that is a better approach than a top-down only type of budget. And there are many different forms of budget development approaches or models that one can take. I'm basically saying give principals more of the information so they can get more and more comfortable and savvy with doing budgets based on financial statements that help them understand the fiscal side of their jobs as school leaders. Yeah, I want them to fight about their budgets. But I want them to fight being informed with data and being informed about what good budgeting and financial accounting is all about.
I agree with you, and I would go further, but that would point to other items later in your recommendations. The big issue that I see is lack of training in this area for our principals in particular and administrators in general. You know, I've always said that being a principal is like being a battalion commander in the Army. You're not just responsible for the training or, you know, the instruction. You're also responsible for making sure that your soldiers are fed and clothed and housed, that the utilities are flowing, everything that school districts do, right? I have said for 22 years that our principals should be as in tune with their facilities and the transportation and the food service as they are with the academics in order to be able to do their job. But the fact is that they often are not.
I'm basically saying here, let's start with providing them with the tools and teaching them about the tools out there, then teaching, and I'm not in any way suggesting that they don't know. I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm suggesting as you move into this new phase, that it's like a restart in some of these areas around making sure you know the tools that are available to you, the statements that are available to you, and hopefully move towards an area where they do come and they fight with some real numbers and data around their budgets and what they'd like to see to serve their children with proof that what they're recommending has evidence of impact.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jallo. Vice President Elliott, I saw your hand went up.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Jallo, my question is, what's the rationale for providing 3 years of historical data for expenditures? What would that help our principals to do?
That will help them look back and see trends. I noticed something's happening with my 3rd grade. I'm noticing that my 4th grade math scores dip. Therefore, in my budget, I want to put an after-school program for math, you know, or I can see that, you know, so that you can look at some trend data. You're not just using current data to make decisions, that you're also using current data and you're looking at some historical data. You know, I noticed when we started school at a different time that my scores went up, or I noticed this happened to my attendance, or I noticed I always had fights during cafeteria. Well, I might need an extra personnel, pay for extra personnel to be in my cafeterias during lunch, you know. So it's the idea so that they can, it's to help them make better decisions.
Oh, okay, thank you. So my concern about point number 3, restrict the number of requests for substitutes, is how do we do that given that we have union contracts and you know, people have so many days of sick time or, you know, time off? How do you go about, you know, controlling that given our union contracts?
So, you know, some of this is so interrelated to other things. And so there's plenty of research and data out there, other than when a person is really sick. When you see high staff absenteeism, there's data out there that tells you what are some of the things that make teachers not come to work on a regular basis when you see it's a real problem. And looking at that data, I noticed that people are always absent on Fridays, you know, or I noticed that, you know, this grade is absent more than the others, or so forth and so on. And so knowing that data helps you think about what kind of substitutes do you need. Do you need long-term substitutes? I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about your day-to-day subs. All I'm suggesting here is that what you have now was previously not as monitored as it could and should be, and that's why you had a couple of your issues with substitutes. You already started as a district, you already started putting in some monitoring around substitutes, and so you already saw a significant drop before COVID hit in the number of substitutes. So it's just a matter of better monitoring. If you don't look at it, then people automatically just jump to asking for substitutes when one hasn't really checked, for instance, to see enrollment or see whether it was a real vacancy or see what that substitute is being used for. So I think that bullet really speaks to continuing the practices you've put in place already pre-COVID to reduce the number of substitutes that people were requesting in the building. So this is in no way a way to restrict, the rights afforded to individuals under their agreements. But there is room there for improvement, as was demonstrated by the district prior to COVID.
And so thank you for that. And your findings on the number of P cards that are used, what's your, what have you found in terms of P card usage? And I guess we would have to come up with some plan in terms of what restriction will look like in the use of those cards. Talk a little bit more about that.
I guess the most impactful part of this is the pure number of P cards in this district, right? I'm not suggesting that people are misusing them, but I am suggesting that the number of P card users or holders in this district is pretty high, right? Which means it's more labor on the part of those managing the pure number and the pure number of purchases to the pure number of holders. It just becomes excessive. And what happens is it kind of hurts the budget in that it doesn't get encumbered the same way your purchases do that come through PeopleSoft. So by the time you hear about the purchase, there's also a likelihood that someone else has already gotten to that budget code and spent that money. So then you have another problem, right? So the main issue here is the number. The usage, I do think there could be some more controls over that. I don't know that people are following. You do have decent P card policies or regs around usage. So the main thing is the number, and the main thing is follow your policies and procedures with fidelity around P card usage.
I would just speak, this is the last thing about this. I would think that if the principals are given their budgets and also given them, and I don't know if you're also including that, providing them with monthly financial statements of their expenditures, that would help to control the usage of those cards, I would imagine.
Right. I mean, if you had a rule around how much could be spent in a given month or whatever, and you gave something back to the principal and said, hey, listen, I noticed last month compared to this month, what's going on? I'm looking and I'm asking you what's going on. You would see a difference.
All right. Thank you.
So, yeah.
I also just want to add that the P cards is something that we have gotten feedback from the external auditor, internal auditor, external auditor, state auditors, and also substitute teaching, just also how the district has historically budgeted. So I do appreciate that it made it onto the report one way or the other, but it's under a shall. So if there are no other questions, we're just going to take a vote on this one now. I think we have to restart. I think some of us voted already, but I think I voted. I'm looking.
Oh, you didn't vote.
Okay.
Okay, now it's 7 yes. 7 yes.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on. That was number 5, even though it's technically number 4. So we're going to go based on the numbers we have here. So number 6, which is the next shall. If anybody has any commentary on the shalls that are listed here, this one's about keeping systems upgraded and upgrading our systems so that they're up to date and being used appropriately.
I do. So I don't have any problem with the should, which is they should be upgraded. But I would add that, yes, our systems are old, but what had about those systems has made them obsolete. I mean, we still collect the same we still need to collect the same financial data. We still need to report the same financial data to the state. Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with the financial management system aside from being old. And I don't find that to be a very effective argument. My real concern is the shall. Policy shall be adopted concerning the district is to keep all three systems upgraded. You're basically saying to us in a time when, again, we're worried about putting teachers in front of students, feeding our babies, and telling us, essentially giving us a state mandate to spend our resources in a way that couldn't be further removed from the classroom. And I don't understand that. The timing is impossible. If the policy read that we should, I mean, I don't know how you write a policy that governs the upgrade when the administration knows full well when they need something, they just don't know where they're going to get the money for it. And the administration is the one that is the body that puts together recommended spending in a budget. The district very seldom says no. So if the district sees the need and can find the money to do it, then we don't need a policy. The biggest problem is these are tens of millions of dollars in investments, and we're in a financial crisis. This is not the time to even be talking about this.
I have my hand raised, Commissioner LeBron.
Yes, I'm sorry, Dr. Myers, go ahead.
Respond.
Mhm.
Commissioner Powell, we recently needed to perform an analysis to complete the retro pay for RTA, and it has taken, we made the determination in June and we didn't even finish all of it. The system is antiquated. It's the way that the finance department, IM&T, and human resources explained it to me. It requires a lot of additional person hours rather to get that done. So we do have, in this, performing certain calculations with some of our systems, it is way antiquated. And we're paying for all of these individuals to compute it when, if we had an upgraded system, we could do it in a matter of moments. It really was excessive how long it took us to calculate it.
You're building an argument on a single event that, quite frankly, we should have been able to avoid in the first place. We shouldn't have had to worry about retro pay. We should have been able to be on top of it and pay them when it was due. So here's the thing. It might take thousands of man hours to accomplish a thing. It will take tens of millions of dollars to replace the system. I think the trade-off is you invest the man hours.
I respectfully disagree, but I respect what you have to say.
Where are you going to find tens of millions of dollars? That's all.
Well, I don't think it's going to be tens of millions of dollars, and you spent tens of millions of dollars trying to uphold an outdated system. The one thing I have to say, I mean, the retro pay is just one example, quite frankly.
I was just trying to give out.
Yeah, that's the most painful and the most recent. But I have to say, talking to all the different departments, that was the one thing everybody agreed on. Whether you came from finance, HR, IT, at the school level, I mean, it's just kind of like a common understanding. This is not working for this district any longer in 2021. It's just not. And you're paying third parties. You're paying.
You'll always third
Wait a
party.
minute, hold on. You have vendors who no longer want to service their own product because it's so outdated. We've put all these patches on there, all these extra programs on there to try to keep it going. And then we have to pay all the man hours to your people who you already have in on staff. It just needs to be upgraded. It really does. And they need to also be in alignment with each other to work better with each other across systems.
So for the benefit of my colleagues who weren't here when we adopted the software that we have today, let me, and I've already told the superintendent my feelings on this. The thing is, what makes the programs difficult to work with isn't the fact that we're X number of releases behind. It's the fact that instead of using industry standards when we bought it and train people to use the system as it walked in the door, we included all of these customizations so that people in our benefits and payroll and what have you systems wouldn't have to learn how to use a new system. And that's backwards. When you're bringing in a new system, you have to get people on board with the new system, and that, even when that includes changing the way you do things. If people want to keep on shuffling, piles of paper and want the computer screen to look just like the papers they were shuffling, then we built in obsolescence, and that's our fault, not PeopleSoft's fault. And so if we're not prepared to do things differently the next time around, we're going to have the same problem in just a handful of years. So, if we're going to do this, first of all, I still object to having a policy. If the administration can find the funding to make it happen, I don't see this board saying no. But you, Dr. Jello, with this word, with this policy, this shall adopt, keeping all systems up to date, you're delivering to us a huge financial mandate, an unfunded mandate.
I'm asking you to spend money to upgrade, and then I'm asking you to write a policy to make sure you stay upgraded so that you don't end up with a product that becomes obsolete to a certain degree again. Other districts do it. Other Big Five districts do it. I know it's possible. It doesn't make sense to spend the money and then you let that become obsolete as well. I think you've kind of learned from that mistake. So that's why if you don't want a policy, you need something to acknowledge that you have to keep it upgraded. If there are upgrades and you need them, then you should upgrade. That's having heard the history of what happened with some of your systems. I think it's important that some kind of commitment be made to keeping it upgraded so it's still user friendly and what's the word I'm going to use? Efficient or usable for the district, for the needs of the district.
Well, I'll say one more time that this board has never said no to the administration when it came to what's been needed from a software standpoint, management systems standpoint. The reason we don't have those upgrades is that superintendent after superintendent after superintendent has decided that we cannot afford it. Then they put their kids and the classroom first. And I don't see how, I personally would never vote for a policy that put the software system ahead of the kids in the classroom. I wouldn't do it.
Dr. Jallo or Dr. Myers, I just have a point of clarification. In the budget I've seen in the past, do we receive funding from the state for technology specifically in software? Do you guys know? If you don't know right now, that's okay. I will actually pass that question along to Kalia for the official board log. But I thought I saw that in there, but just curious as to how much this cost is going to be, but and then also if the state actually funds it specifically for software and technology. Pretty sure I saw that in there, but I'm just not sure if it's going to align with what we receive and what this may potentially cost us. I do recall back in either 2018 or, yeah, it had to be 2018 in the fall. There in the audit committee, there was a presentation around some of the issues around software and what the like fiscal impact was, and in order for us to keep up to date with certain things that were being processed through there. And what I will say is that that administration at the time said they were going to upgrade us and that they were going to upgrade PeopleSoft and that we weren't utilizing all of the benefits of the softwares that we had, and then nothing ever happened with that. So, you know, again, that was 2018 and here we are in 2020 having this conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask participants to vote on the shalls for this one and whether you support it or not.
Okay, we only have 6 votes, 5 yeses, 1 no. Not sure who did not. Okay, now we have 6 yeses, 1 no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see here. That was number 6. The next shall is actually number 8, that the chiefs shall receive monthly reports identifying violators of direct pay procedures, and among other things, progressive discipline protocol should be established and shared with cabinet for pending implementation. So I don't know if there needs to be any discussion on this one. This is more of district leadership, but if anybody has anything they want to add on this shall, if not, we can just go straight to a vote on this one.
I don't actually see a shall on page 24.
Under evidence of implementation.
I only see shoulds.
And
Oh.
evidence of
Number 8?
implementation.
Under evidence
I'm
of
on number
implementation.
8. On the far, that's in the evidence of implementation, but not in the recommendation. Recommendations are all shoulds.
Well, I'm also using the staff's chart to highlight which ones are shalls, and because it says shall there, I don't know, Dr. Jallo, if you want to give some clarification on whether if it's in the recommendation or in the implementation, if it's something that we don't agree with, if it has to go to the hearing.
Number page 24.
Yeah, I'm on a totally different page. I mean, I do have chief shall receive and hold staff accountable for proper use of, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Page 24 of the
It's, I'm totally looking at something different. It's fine. Ask your question again, I'm sorry.
it's okay. It's listed under evidence of implementation versus the recommendation.
The evidence of recommendation, chief shall receive monthly reports, a progressive discipline protocol should be established and shared with the cabinet for pending. Yeah, because there's more to it. That's why I'm kind of like a little lost.
I would be happy if the part that says chiefs shall receive was embedded in the recommendations, not in the implementation.
I can live with that, actually.
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. I don't know if anybody else has any feedback on moving that over. If not, we can go ahead and vote. Commissioner Malloy, I see you voted already. Thank you. Did I vote? I have to vote.
Madam
Okay,
Chairperson, what are we doing with the shoulds?
So we're actually not discussing the shoulds tonight, Cynthia. So in the beginning of Dr. Jallo's binder, you may have gotten it via email as well. The shoulds are things that the board can't, obviously we will have to discuss at another time, but the shoulds are recommendations that the board can choose to follow through with the recommendation or not. But the shalls, if there are disagreements with the shalls, we have to actually disagree at the public hearing next week. And then it goes to the state commissioner to make the final determination on whether that stays a should or a shall, and whether we have to do it or not. And so that's why we're focusing on the shalls, because next week is the hearing.
Okay, I think I may be a little confused, but I'll talk to Dr. Jallo.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 7.
Number 9, do you have number 9 as a shall or a should?
As a should.
As a should.
Do you have as a
Yeah,
shall?
that one should be a shall.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Should I, so I move it now?
Right, because this is critical.
Okay.
I'm moving it over. So number 9 is now a shall, you guys. Let me have
Yeah,
it.
this is critical.
Francine, what was the vote on 8, please?
7 yeses.
Okay, thank you.
So number 9 has now been moved over to.
Yeah, and I just want to explain why.
Yep.
There's been a lot of discussion over the last 2 weeks about fund balance and, you know, where are we fiscally, and what's our debt, what's our fund balance, what's our cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of those questions can be answered with more certainty if we stop spending on the 15th of the month of February or sooner. Most districts, you cannot continue to spend most of your money after January or February. And the reason why districts shut down spending is so that they can close their books. And in this district, one of the first things I noticed is that you continue to spend through June, and then you try to close your books in July and August, but you're still receiving invoices or bills, so to speak, in September and October. So you can't close your books and determine what your fund balance is. And not knowing your fund balance, leads to other things. So in most districts, you stop spending somewhere in January, February. That doesn't mean all spending stops, but the bulk of your spending, especially on expenditures that are going to help children in the classrooms, stops around that time. You stop purchasing. If you haven't purchased it by then the child is not going to benefit from you buying it in February, right? Because it won't get there till April. The school year is almost over. So the idea is to do this sooner so that you can have a better chance of closing your books, so that you can then know exactly where you stand fiscally, know what monies you have left over to put into a fund balance or call a fund balance. This is critical. Am I saying all spending stops? No, but 90% of it should stop. Okay, and this is a practice that is pretty common in many, many places.
Thank you. Willa?
So I certainly understand and appreciate your point of view here. But what we really have to do is address a culture issue. Because a lot of that spending that happens after February, especially in the last months of school year, are principals trying to restock for the next school year.
And that's fine. Yeah.
And so, so I can appreciate and understand what they're trying to do. And we can't just shut the spigot off if that's what they're doing. We have to give folks fair warning that that's what's going to happen, and that they're going to have to put in their requests on July 1st, start their spending July 1st for the September school open. And that they can't try to get a jump on it anymore. And that's going to change how they submit their budgets.
Okay. So we're going to vote. I don't see anybody else hands up, so this is a yes or no vote at this moment.
We have 6 yeses. Okay, now we have 7.
Thank you.
So that was number 9. The next one is number 10. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on number 10, and it's really that we're going to implement the full implementation of policy 8600.
There's the one thing I just want to mention about this. I mean, you can certainly read this policy at your leisure, but one of the things that should be happening is that your Medicaid compliance officer is required to report to the board the status of Medicaid. So to keep having your Medicaid reimbursements come up as an area of concern by myself, distinguished educator, and many, many others, when in fact you have this great policy, if you just follow it, at least you'll have more information about what's going on in that area that you've been identified for by others before me.
Thank you, Dr. Jallo. And actually, one of the requests I have in addition to that I attached to this recommendation or the shall is really one for the staff and the administration. There are a number of reports that the board, either through policy or through conversations we've had that we've thrown out there. I know for me, like in finance, I'm requesting, the charter every other month now that came out of the state auditor's recommendations. And that's just one example for us to have eyes on, the enrollment there, but also the fiscal impact on our budget. But because there is such a large number of reports, I'm hoping that we can create a report due date sheet, a cheat sheet with all of the reports when they're due to the board, either month to month. That way we know that we are getting them, that we remember that we're getting them, and that we don't let any report required to the board through policy or through audits or through recommendations fall through the cracks. Because when I read that we have not seen a report since 2013, I certainly have never seen any Medicaid compliance reports since 2018. So certainly even before that, the board hasn't seen it, but I do think it's difficult to remember as a board member every single report that we're expected to remember that we're requesting through policy. I know that there was a policy change again in 2018 with the request that we would get a report on that. And I can tell you, I've never seen any reports on that policy. I won't talk about that policy right now, but I just want to request from the staff and administration, if you guys can work together to figure out all of the reports that are required to be provided to the board and the months that they're required to be provided and the frequency. So should we be expecting it once a month, once a year? That way everybody has that. Yes, Kalia.
I just want to say that we do have that document. It's the policy deliverables chart. And the deputies and I have a meeting next week, Tuesday, to review that and update it.
Yeah, so I would like to see it with, again, the due dates of when things are due or the month that the board members can expect it, and then the frequency that board members should be expecting those reports if possible.
I would just add that the power of any report is some kind of language or discussion around the implications of what's in the report, right? If you just see the number, you don't know whether the number is good, bad, high, low. If you don't get some kind of, it doesn't have to be major, but just a brief explanation as to why this is an important number or data point to examine at this point in time in the school year or whatever the case may be.
Thank you. So if nobody else has their hands up to conversation, we'll go straight into voting on this shall.
We have 6 yeses, and now we have 7 yeses.
Okay, thank you very much. That was number 10. The next one is number 11. If anybody has any questions on number 11 and the shalls that are listed there. I'm gonna look at the hands. I have to. Commissioner Malloy, I see your hand is up on number 11.
Yeah, I guess my question on this was which cabinet members, or is it assumed that this will be all cabinet members who are part of this process?
Well, this doesn't really apply, this particular one doesn't apply to the board. This applies to the superintendent and her cabinet, knowing.
I'm asking which cabinet members, I mean, within the
Oh, I'm sorry. There's kind of like cabinet. There's established member. Well, how am I talking? Go ahead.
No, so what I'm wondering is,
All
saying,
cabinet members.
I'm sorry?
All cabinet members, Commissioner Loy. So superintendent, deputy superintendent, human resources, CFO, everybody on the superintendent's cabinet.
Right, so they'll be working with our legal department or our labor negotiations people so that every single cabinet member has a working understanding and knowledge of that process.
So we
Okay,
can
thank
have
you. That's what
uniform
my question
and
was.
consistent procedures and approach to reviewing them, so it doesn't become arbitrary and capricious, frankly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, and if there are no other questions or comments, we're going to go straight to vote.
We have 6 yeses. It's one person still needs to vote. Now we have 7.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for not calling people out, Francine.
I was ready to start rolling and looking, but I'm gonna let Francine do what Francine's doing. She's doing a great job. Number 12 is where we see another shall. So this one says that number 12 is we shall.
Oh, yeah, that one got really summarized.
Yeah, it's really summarized, but in my book it says should, but I don't know. Well, the evidence of implementation says shall.
Yeah, this is really about the board being aware of, you know, federal and state, well, title funds, you know, Title 1, 2, 3, 4, how much money you're receiving, how is that money being spent, what are those different title funds for, a working knowledge, because it is a considerable amount of money.
So I have an observation here that the bullet is not so much a condensation as the language was lifted from the evidence of implementation column.
Yeah.
So in your recommendation, you've used the language protocol or a bylaw. And then in evidence of implementation, you are specific, you say a bylaw shall be established.
Yeah.
Maybe
here's where the discussion comes in, because I don't know what's.
So I think it would be a friendly amendment to suggest that the board adopt a policy, because this is not the place for a bylaw. Bylaws only governs the board and how we conduct our business. It doesn't.
I'm open to that. That's
okay.
Fine.
Yeah, change the language to policy. Adopt a policy.
And then for Kalia, I just want to highlight that it says report here, because this is, again, when as you're updating your other report procedural thing that you have, this is a report that would need to be added to that list.
Thank you.
Could I add that the language here in number 12 is replicated in number 18, and I would suggest that we use policy there as well.
We'll remove 18 because I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Well, there was
some. It's a duplication.
On number 18, it addressed a different concern, but with the same issue. Right.
Okay, so we're going to go for a vote if there are no other questions or comments on this one.
We have 7 yeses. Did you guys hear me?
Yep, got it, Francine.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay, okay. It got quiet. It got so-
Yeah,
I'm
it got really
sorry. I
quiet.
was still muted. The next shall is number 34. I thought you guys heard me say that. I was like, thank you, Francine. The next shall is number 34. So I apologize. I apparently was still muted.
How could that be? Number 17 has the word require. Require the proposed budget reflect. How could that not be a
Again,
shall?
I'm going by the chart that the staff created, and if it doesn't say shall, then they didn't put it in there, and Dr. Jallo can clarify whether that's a shall or just a requirement in terms of language.
Well, there is a shall in the evidence column. It says an RCSD budget transfer
So
policy.
again, I'm going based off of the chart in terms of shalls that the staff created. So,
Calling out potential error in the chart, okay?
okay, and Dr. Jallo can clarify if she put it under the recommendation or evidence of implementation, if she meant to put it under the recommendation.
The first word in recommendation is require. So
So Dr. Jallo, I'm asking
Yeah.
for Dr. Jallo to give clarification on her report and how she listed the information.
Right. I have to admit, which one are we talking about? Because now-
Number 7.
Number 17,
Number 17.
which is on page 29, Dr.
All
Jallo.
right, thank you. 17. Yeah, that's a shall. I mean, it's shall and require, one and the same.
Okay, well, thank you. And staff, if you want to note it for your chart,
There we go.
go to number 17.
So having sorted that out, I have a question. In the second paragraph in the recommendations, Dr. Jallo, you write, establish a budget transfer policy, including specific guidelines for the frequency of transfers. Where does the budget amendment process or procedures fit into this recommendation? Because as you well know, our budget amendments are often like stacked. And so we'll get a grant approval after our budget. It gets set aside and for a future board meeting. We then approve the increased revenue and the corresponding expenses. Often and this ties into your other recommendation about grants and us getting like looped in on grants, and I appreciate that. But where does this budget transfer policy concept, how does it knit together with a budget amendment process?
So the issue is the number of budget transfers that are conducted. If it was like what you just described and it happened, 2-3 times, so be it. But you have the frequency of the budget transfers is of concern and reflects the possibility that there were some challenges with the creation of the budget in the first place. In terms of your second part of your question around budget amendments, we had a meeting today about budget amendments, and once again, it's just the number. So I just think that you need to have a policy around the number of budget transfers and whether you want them reported, you want to know about them, or the number of them, et cetera, et cetera. Somehow you need to be notified about the frequency of the transfers. It is excessive, in my opinion, and the opinions of a few other folks who are pretty respected in the field. So that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, I do see that you're attempting to answer a different problem than what I just raised, so that's fine.
Well, actually, at the budget amendment, well, Please ask again, because I want to make sure I'm clear.
No, you're fine. I was reading the problem in a different context, so understanding what problem you're trying to solve, I'm comfortable.
Okay. Okay.
Vice President Elliott?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Dr. Jallo, that I understand the correlation between the budget book and the budget transfers, because the budget book is sort of a snapshot of our for a period of time in time. And so to be able to, I don't understand how we would align the budget transfers, to align the transfers with the budget, because the budget, you know, is what we have created and what we are to go forth in terms of our financial decisions. But how do you align that? How will we do that when the budget is again a snapshot in time?
What's the best way
To me, at least.
The idea, the concern is the budget book is presented to you, and then after it's presented, the frequency of the transfers of monies in and out of budget codes is excessive. And the amount of money transferred in and out of budget codes is excessive. And I'm saying, should you have some budget transfers? Absolutely. I'm saying there's no guideline, there's no limit to the number of transfers that you can do throughout the year. And I'm saying that I think you need a policy that puts some kind of parameters around the frequency and the amount of money that's moved around between codes after the budget is approved.
Okay, because you're saying that, in essence, you're saying that because of the transfers, that the budget lacks fidelity. Is that a way of saying it?
What I'm saying is, what motivation, or what's the rationale for so many transfers to be needed?
But is that a budget book issue, or is that just a?
Well, it changes what you first saw in your budget book.
That's true.
Right? It changes. Right? So we found certain codes where money was sitting there, and that money was used to fund other things and other codes. So it's kind of, I don't want to say it's misleading, but it is in a way misleading, because that's not what was reflected in your budget book. And do they need to be made? Yeah, there are times when they need to be made. If a big grant came in or something like that, yeah, it needs to be made, but not that often and not that much money.
I just also want to bring up the fact, Commissioner Elliott, that we in finance presented a draft from NISBA on what a budget transfer policy. So there is like a shell or an example for us to use, and that is one of the other policies that we're going to bring back up again on Tuesday. So we presented it last month. We're going to bring it back up again on Tuesday to see if anybody has any feedback on that. And so we'll send it out again tomorrow in the packet for finance. But it's something we're looking at and tracking and examining other school districts. And Kalia put a lot of work into doing a lot of research on that piece too. And so we do have an example from NISBA on what a budget transfer would look like. But one of the reasons I strongly support this, not just the shall, but this has been a conversation for a little bit now, is the fact that we do have a budget, but if we don't follow the budget and we're allowing large transfers from one budget item to another, without the board understanding that that's occurring on a regular basis, we don't have a balanced budget. There's just no way to balance it that way. And how can we be held accountable for that if we don't even know as a board that it's happening, because we don't have a policy that requires administration when they're doing that many or transfers to come to us. So we end up in this cycle where we're getting blamed for potentially something that we also didn't even know was happening because we don't have a policy that dictates that they have to let us know and they have to get our approval after a certain amount. And so some of those conversations will happen again in finance, more in depth around the policy and what it should look like for our district.
But, just to add to that, Commissioner Elliott, we found that monies were being moved to pay for substitutes, right? Out of one fund into another, just to compensate for the fact that you had already spent all your money on substitutes. So just things like that, you want to know, and some of them are absolutely legitimate. But you still want to know. You want to know because you may be led to believe that the budget that you approve looks the exact same way with the same amount of money in each code. So it's just to help you be more informed about how money is moving in your district or between codes during the school year.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. All right, so we're going to take a vote on this one.
Okay, we have 7 voted yes.
Thank you. Next one is number 18. There's a shall in there. And
I think we already discussed that. That's
that's the one we're on now.
Yeah.
Number 19.
Just as a point of, I think there's a typo on.
Yeah,
on it.
H and K funds.
Well, actually, that's the typo is in the next paragraph. Council of Great City Schools, not Greater City Schools. It's not on the chart. It's in your page 31. It's Council of Great City Schools, not Greater.
Is there any feedback on this recommendation or the shall from anybody? Okay. So before I go to vote, I did want to point out the modernization plan is listed in here. And I did want to, Dr. Jallo, ask you, as someone who works for the state, directly, if there is a way that we can request an audit of the modernizations board and their finances, which are, how they spend their money, what happens there is directly tied to us, but we have no say as a board in their budget, how the dollars are spent, what contractors and vendors they go through. And, we do get some reporting, but I would love for the state to audit them, especially at this particular time, just to make sure as we start looking at, the modernization plan again, and whether it's still something we're going to move forward with the original plan. So just
I will ask.
Thank you.
I will find out how that can happen.
I second what Commissioner LeBron said, but more to the point, you identify the $71 million capital project budget. That's the capital improvement plan. That's the facilities modernization plan. There's, quite frankly, very little evidence that our operations department, which only manages maintenance and capital improvement plan, which is like $16 or $17 million, has ever been, shall I say, under or overspent or under or overmanaged. I think this problem is, I think, needs to focus specifically on the facilities modernization.
Okay. I'm not quite sure where you're reading, but yes.
Well, in your finding.
What are you suggesting? Are you suggesting a change, or what do you?
Yeah, I mean, you refer to the Department of Operations, okay, in your findings, and it isn't really our Department of Operations that's responsible for the $71 million. It's the It is the Joint Schools Construction Board. So directly to Commissioner LeBron's point, we don't have any say in that, and they ought to be audited. But to suggest that it's our operations department that's over or underspending is just wrong. They've done an admirable job of accomplishing what they do between building maintenance and our capital improvement plan, which only has $16 or $17 million allocated each year.
I didn't think I was suggesting that the operations department had done anything one way or the other. I'm suggesting that the presentation that Mike Schmidt, I think, made a couple of months ago was one that was beneficial, I thought, to the board and also to cabinet. And I just think that that's something that should continue so that people are more aware of CIP and the modernization plan as well. It's more of an awareness and understanding, especially from the academic side of the house, since that's the side that will be most impacted by those decisions made in the Department of Operations.
Okay. Oh, I see President White's hand up though.
Yeah, I guess I was looking for a little greater clarity in that I know in my experience that our facilities department has really done an exemplary job at maintaining our properties and giving us regular reports about those properties. So, and in terms of the FMP board, as my colleagues have said, we really don't have much control, but insofar as we do, they do provide us presentations. Are you suggesting, I'll throw the question back at you, that the presentations that they do give us, because they come to us and they ask us, what should these buildings look like? Mike Schmidt, on behalf of the Facilities Modernization Board, tells us about where they're going. We get these huge, I don't think you've gotten one since you've been here because it's been sort of stalled because of funding, but we get these huge reports, booklets that describe their potential plan. So I guess I'm not exactly sure what you mean by there has been little evidence of discussion, analysis, or benchmarking for funding to support that work. And maybe there hasn't been lately on the FMP stuff because that stuff is really sort of stalled. But I think they've done a pretty good job. But I guess I'm wondering, what else do you think they should do?
I'm suggesting moving forward that you're about to go into a new phase. Yep. And that many of these decisions that are related to your buildings and your lease spaces, et cetera, you're going to have to make sure that people in operations, as they have already demonstrated, know what they're doing, understand what they're doing, and doing things to the benefit of the district, but that circle widens to include more administrators, more people on cabinet, and especially more people on the academic side of the house as you move forward and have to make decisions about buildings potentially, have to make decisions about debts or debt that you might be incurring in any of these projects moving forward, looking at which buildings are in which cycles in these two different levels of projects moving forward, that it has to be more than just the operations side, knowing and understanding how those decisions are going to impact instruction and academics.
And this is not, we can move on to seeing what people, I think, and we could talk about it later, but I think they have actually done a pretty good job at that. Mm-hmm. I really do. If you ask around, particularly in terms of our CIP, we stand alone in the state as one of the exemplary capital improvement programs that maintains its property. And we got people over there that have been there for years, but I don't want to, people might think I'm being defensive, but I want to hold up the good work.
Here's my point. My point, if you read the whole section, yeah, it's more about being more inclusive on the academic side of this and how these decisions in these two areas of operations impact academics. I am not casting any dispersions on the good work of the Department of Operations. But if you read it, what I'm asking is for more involvement on the instructional and academic side of the house as you make decisions about the future of your buildings, what the modernization will be, what it will look like, which buildings as you move forward. That's what the recommendation is. It is not.
Okay. All I'm saying is, and we've gone through 31 pages. I've only mentioned once or twice where I had some questions.
No, I don't.
Hold on. All I am saying is, I believe the record is clear that they do a good job at that. And let me just be clear about why I think, with respect to your assertion that they need to, and anybody can always do a better job. We could say that about anything. But in terms of not operating in silos and making sure they're talking to instructional people, even on the FMP side, not to mention the CIP side, I think they actually do a very good job of that. You haven't been around where we've seen the plans for the facilities modernization and how the work that they go through to really understand what the needs are. Monroe High School is a great example of that, but there are other examples. They really bent over backwards to understand what the needs are. Now, are you saying everybody can do a better job? Oh, absolutely. But I'm just here with 31 pages, and I've not been. There's some pages that I'm a little bit critical of, but we haven't gotten to them yet. But I just want to be clear. I think they actually do a good job. And from what I've heard in the state, Rochester City School District has one of the best capital improvement formats, initiatives in the state. But again, we don't need to argue the point, because if the point is they can do a better job, yes, everybody can do a better job. But I just want folks to know, I think our staff does a very good job.
I would endorse that statement, Commissioner White, and add to that another example, School 28. In the facilities modernization at the front end, the actual classroom configurations were set based on articulation from the teaching and learning side of the house, that building was going to go from a K-6 to a K-8. And so home and careers classrooms were put in, special ed classrooms were put into the plan based on what the teaching and learning side of the house requested. Plus, before all of that, before anything was done with facilities modernization, we had this, I forget the term exactly, but the ideal school. What would all of our schools have in them that would make them all equally, that would provide the equity of all having the same baseline resources from a facilities standpoint. That was done at the very front end of this process. So I could see how Dr. Jallo wouldn't have seen that, right, because we had need to have those conversations in the however many months she's been here.
It really, let me just say, I'm thinking about the World of Inquiry. I think it was, World of Inquiry, when they were doing their changes. Not only did they, again, you have to see these binders that they would come up with. They're heavy, they're extensive, and you hear these conversations. And again, as Commissioner Powell said, I think you didn't have the advantage of seeing how those plans came together. They really bent over backwards to understand the instructional needs and how that would affect the physical layout. And I can continue to mention schools. East High School, there's just, they really have done, I just think it's important to note, they really have done a good job at what you're saying, which is, and again, I'm just reading the findings. There's been little evidence of discussion, analysis, and if you had been there when we were doing this stuff, I don't know that you would say that. But in any event, we can always do better.
I just want to clarify, since the community is listening in, that what it says is that prior to January 31st, 2021, reassess the facilities modernization plans with district leadership from operations and teaching and learning to determine the fiscal and academic implications for the district. And everything that has been mentioned by both President White and Commissioner Powell is true. We do get extensive reports and a binder of a presentation. But if I was to review those presentations right now and Dr. Jallo was to ask me as a board member, what is the fiscal implication of those plans on the district, either now or long-term. I would not be able to answer that, nor would I be able to answer what the academic implications are. So, and I don't think that any of our staff would be able to answer that in that context of what the recommendation is. So I just want to put that out there for the record, because yes, they do give us binders and plans and do presentations that are public, that are usually done and streamed live and open to the public, and have these public meetings as well. But for that particular recommendation, it doesn't answer what Dr. Jallow is recommending. I am going to, again, though, Dr. Jallow, request for an audit, because I am interested in understanding how dollars are spent and how decisions are made by those dollars from the Modernization Board, and if there's any actual implications to us on that. So with that, I do want to go ahead and take a vote so we can move on to the next one. And Francine, just let me know when you have the counts. Thank you.
We have 7 yeses.
Great, thank you. The next one I have is number 27, but if anybody has one sooner, speak up, please.
I did have a query. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. No, go ahead, Kalia.
Yeah, I did have a question for Dr. Jallow. So there are some areas where there's where it's like must. Should we consider that to be a shall?
Yes.
Okay. And will, is that also, are we considering that to be a shall?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So that's going to change the chart a little bit, everyone.
Well, and in fact, number 20, it simply it goes directly to an action verb of review, effective July 1, 2021, review the contract. That sounds like a shall to me, although the word shall did not appear.
Right.
So Dr. Jallow, do you want to clarify whether number 20 is a shall?
20?
Or the intention behind the wording you use? For number 20 on page 32.
32.
No, that should be a should.
I should. Okay, so we kept that fine. And then, so if we are looking at will and must, then number 27.
Yeah, that's the one I had, but
Yeah.
Okay. So number 27, which is on page 38.
Commissioner LeBron,
Yes.
I just wanted to say to Dr. Jallow that I will be meeting with her to discuss observations. We don't need to spend any time on it today, that are described in, for example, 24, I think 25, about the legal department. But we can discuss that offline.
Yes, and President White, I also mentioned that the focus tonight would be on the shalls, only because all of the shoulds, the board can choose not to follow that recommendation. And so I do think that we should spend more extensive time on all of the shoulds throughout the course of, the next couple of weeks at different segments of it, if we can, to determine if that's the board's will or not.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we did last night. We focused on the shells. And my comment to Dr. Jallow with respect to those references to the legal department, there shoulds, and there will be opportunity for her and I to discuss some of those observations.
Okay.
I have an observation on page 36 as well for Dr. Jallow. In the finding, there it reads,
Can you tell me which number?
one bargaining unit involving.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Powell, we're on number 27 right now.
Just an observation that perhaps
Okay.
Commissioner Jallow would want to fix before submitting is on.
Well, I think we're still going to discuss the shoulds another time, but Van just said he was going to meet with her one-on-one. You have the same opportunity to meet Dr. Jallow.
Conversation about shoulds or shalls. It's a typo I'm trying to bring to her attention.
Okay.
The typo is, an MOA with one bargaining unit with involving 6,4 employees. I don't know if that's supposed to be 6,400 employees. Probably not. There's just something wrong with that number.
Okay, we'll look.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments on number 27?
Yeah, Commissioner LeBron, I'm just trying to raise my hand here.
Yeah.
Again, I can talk to Dr. Gallo offline. Number 27, I circled that for some conversation with her. Factually cannot be disputed that the funding that we received has remained stagnant for 15 years, even though the city has increased its property tax levy by reevaluating the value of property and taking in more revenues, but not giving the district more revenue. I respectfully disagree with the language there that says the Rochester School District has not embraced nor instituted the culture of discipline spending, which exacerbates the deterioration of the district's fiscal stability. I think Commissioner Malloy made the point earlier on with respect to the state. I would make that same point with respect to the city affairs. It's unconscionable that they would leave that amount in that same figure for 14, 15 years, not even being adjusted for the cost of inflation, and then extrapolate from that that is because we have not been conscientious or embraced the culture of discipline. I can't tell you how inaccurate I believe that is. I believe part of our problem is that we are underfunded, that if the city, who has lost population, the city has lost population just as we have lost students. The city has lost population and they find a need to increase the tax levy to pay for services. What in God's name do we think our students who attend these buildings? So I will discuss this with you later. I think this misses, I'm not arguing and I have not argued.
Let me add.
Let me finish.
Let me
finish my point first. Let me finish my point first. That's how we do it here. You have made up into this 38 pages of recommendations, and I have not disagreed with one. And I reserve the right to say, I think the language here does not take into account the fact that our municipality, we're a fiscally dependent district, our municipality has not changed to 1 cent the amount of money that it gives this district. And the language in this suggests that our problem is that we don't appreciate our financial circumstance. I would respectfully submit that the city, who has kept the levy, has got increased money for its expenditures, even though the city's population has decreased, that it is the city that hasn't embraced a culture of understanding what the needs are of our children.
What I was going to share is that there are 2 more recommendations that may not be in your copy, and I just want to read one of them to you. The district should engage the legislature in discussions about opportunities to loosen the district's financial dependency on the city of Rochester. And I think that that begins to address what I think you're trying to mention in a way that I recognize that interrelationship, that fiscal interrelationship that the district currently has with the city is something that should be on the agenda when you meet with legislators to begin that conversation about how that entanglement might be examined, perhaps hopefully to your benefit. But recognize that and have put that in my newer edition of your plan.
I appreciate that. And if you noticed, I clicked on the applause sign there. Thank you very much.
I can't see it, but yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice President Elliott and then Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, the question I have, Dr. Jallo, has to do with why was that statement about the maintenance of effort included in this anyway. It seems to me that you're talking more about the way in which we've spent money, but I didn't understand how the MOE was connected to, you know, us being not disciplined in our spending. So you use that MOE to say what? I was not clear about that.
I'm using the MOE to make people understand that your financial revenues that come from the city have not changed, right? But the spending still increases, right? So
Well, I guess I'm thinking that it's not only because of the MOE,
right,
that, you know, it's everything else.
right.
I mean, we've
But I
got
have to mention the MOE to then help the reader understand that last statement that I just read as well.
Okay.
Because otherwise, will the reader understand that intertanglement and why you're kind of constrained by this same number year after year after year, which loses value each year because it doesn't change. That 119 that you got 15 years ago buys far less than 119 can buy today.
So if it's my turn, my concerns are sort of straddle the line between what Commissioner White and Commissioner Elliott have raised. It is not obvious on a face value read of this section that the MOE has anything to do with your finding or with your recommendation. I would submit to you that there is in fact a kind of culture that does not treat district funds as if it were one's own. You call it, does not embrace nor institute a culture of disciplined spending. To a limited degree, I can agree with that, but that has just about nothing to do with the MOE being flat. If you have another recommendation or you have another finding that finds fault with a flat MOE and have a recommendation for that, then that should stand on its own. But that whole first sentence and the phrase, the transitional phrase at the same time, I think should be stricken from this point in order to make the recommendation meaning more meaningful rather than right now it's just confusing.
Well, let Kalia or whoever put the, you know, the writing that you're suggesting in there, and we'll take a look at it, definitely.
Van, is that a new hand?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner LeBron. I would agree with the observations made by Vice President Elliott and the statement made by Commissioner Powell. I think the MOE might be, the language in there might be confusing to even have it in there because as you all know, the MOE just says that it establishes a floor. It just says that they can't give us below 119. The problem is that and by the way, it was at 119 before the MOE was put in there. The problem is, even though they're collecting more revenue, they're not going above 119. The MOE didn't say they got to stay at 119. And in fact, I think during Bill Johnson's administration, I think it was 120 something. But the MOE said, okay, listen, you can't fall below that floor. And I don't even think people are using the MOE. People who don't want to give us more money are using the MOE as a defense. But I think having it in there may be confusing because people who don't know may think, oh, the MOE is the reason why it's flat. It's not. Actually, the good thing about the MOE is if it weren't there, we'd probably be at 110, 100 million, right? So I would suggest, and maybe we can work on this, I would suggest getting rid of that altogether because I think people will think that the MOE is the reason why we're at 119, and it's not. The MOE is not a ceiling. It's a floor, and again, I'll repeat: the city has collected more money even though their resident population is decreased. They haven't increased the percentage on each of the tax levy, but what they have done is they've reevaluated the value of each and every home, collected more money, but not given that additional money, our proportionate share of that money, to the schools. So yeah, maybe we can talk about changing that language, because actually I'm very thankful for that, MOE, because I think we'd be well under 119 if it weren't there.
Okay, we're gonna go to a vote on this one. And Dr. Jallo, can you make sure we get the updated additions that you
Yeah,
just?
like I said the other day, every Friday I collect, you know, revisions, recommendations, and we'll update.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Talia, you're keeping, I'm sorry, Commissioner LeBron, but I just want to make sure, Talia, you're keeping track of this and like, for example, on this one, will you reach out to us, or should we, that is myself, Commissioner Powell, maybe Commissioner Vice President Elliott, should we reach out to you, or how do you want to do that?
I would definitely recommend if persons have the suggested language that they would like to suggest, to email it to me, and I'll plug them into the document that I sent to Dr. Jallo.
Just to be very.
Commissioner LeBron,
Yes.
just one other thought. How different is, we were talking about the budget and aligning, and we were talking about budget transfers under that particular recommendation. This recommendation, number 27, seems to be similar. Dr. Jallo, can you respond to that? Because it speaks to budget transfers, a budget transfer policy. Can just react to that for me?
Yeah, some recommendations apply more than once because,
okay,
you know, they just, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to vote yes on the recommendation, but with the understanding that it's the finding that I'm struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
And Kali, you documented that piece. I know you asked them to email you the language, but just having a note which commissioner has requested the language change.
So we only have 5 yeses and.
Sorry about that, I was muted. Yeah, I will indicate that language is supposed to come in, and I've documented who.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who had suggested language apart from Commissioner Powell and President White? Okay. All right. What was the score on Francie?
7.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next one I have is number 30, and we're almost done, you guys. So any questions or comments on number 30?
On number 28, there is the word will. There is both in the recommendations and the evidence of implementation. So I think that's supposed to be a shall column.
I think Kali had just asked Dr. Jallo if will should be considered a shall, but we'll ask Dr. Jallo for clarification.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did say that.
Number 28. Okay, so I scrolled back up to 28. I will move those over. My apologies.
Number 28 is a shall, Dr. Jallo?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think number 27 as well.
We just did 27.
27.
Yeah, we were on 27. That's the one we were just debating and
Gotcha.
voted on. Any questions or comments on number 28? Give folks a second to review it.
I had a note here. My observation here is only this, that it doesn't matter how early we start. The decision makers in the administration side are fundamentally going to, fundamentally don't believe they should have to make cuts, that that they've already cut to the bone. And that's where, and starting sooner just means starting those arguments sooner over. No, 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 I've already done my share of cutting. No, no, no. You know, make somebody else do those cuts. That, I don't see how changing the calendar truly is going to produce a better product. It's not my problem as far as it's not a problem for me. I just don't think it's going to solve anything.
Dr. Jallo, would you like to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I disagree. I think if you start sooner, you have more time to look at your data. People have more time to justify the request that they are making or justify the reason why they can't cut. And you're not rushing to get it in front of city council and have it balanced. You have really taken the time to analyze and look at data before you, as you build your budget. I don't know that it'll change people's attitudes about the process, especially when you have to cut, but it'll certainly give you more time to do due diligence in building your budget. When you talk to the people across the district, you know, they felt like it was such a rush and mistakes were made and people didn't have time to do the things they wanted to do with the budget. And so this is just an attempt to give more time to complete that process.
Thank you. And I just want to let the board know we did vote and we did change the dates already. So this is one of those evidence of implementation that we've already started this year.
Would you like it to be modified to reflect that this process has started?
Yes, please, because we did take a vote and officially updated the calendar.
I mean,
Through the
that's fair.
finance committee, so thank you, yes. So the next one I had, well, I'm sorry, we have to take a vote before we go on to the next one. So I'll take the votes now, unless anybody has anything else they would like to add. All right, let's go straight to vote.
Seven yes.
So the next one I have is number 30. So unless 29 is on there with a hidden shell, which I don't see, we're gonna go on to 30. Does anybody have any questions on number 30 about budget codes being reflected?
Why, Dr. Jallo, why were they not, what was the reason for not using those codes in your findings?
I'm gonna go mute. Go ahead, Dr. Jallo.
What's the best way to respond? People had multitude of reasons. I think, you know, this is what they've been doing. This is how they've always done it. It's working. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's extra work. I think if you have to spend time converting your codes to the right codes every year, why not just use the uniform codes in the first place? I couldn't give you a response that I thought was legitimate as to why we don't use the uniform codes as other districts do. I don't have a good response for that.
Okay,
Commissioner
that's telling.
Commissioner Elliott, you and I can have a sidebar conversation as well on it. But
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Malloy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm just wondering for number 30, because it says the budget codes must and will, is that why it's not a should, it's a shall?
That's a shall.
It is a shall. Okay, thanks.
That's a shall. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments on this one, we're going to go straight to vote.
Seven yeses.
Okay, next one I have marked as number 37.
That's one of the newer ones that I pulled now as a shall. It wasn't originally documented on the sheet as a shall.
Yeah, so Dr. Jallo, I
Dr.
do
Jallo.
want to ask for a clarification if this is a should or a shall. It's related to the managed choice policy.
The manager, I'm sorry.
Number 37.
Number 37.
Number 35
I think-
doesn't a should or shall either, but it starts right away with require. That sounds like shall to me.
Number 35?
Do you
Yeah.
want to get clarification on number 35 and then number
37.
35.
It's on page 46.
Yes. Yeah, that's a shall. Anything involving special ed.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say that I believe that some of this work has already started.
For number 35.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. 35 is now a shall.
So
37.
back to number 30. Oh, can we get clarification on number 37 before we move?
Yeah, 37 is asking you to review. So that's yeah.
That's a shall?
Mhm.
Okay.
Do we need to vote on 35?
We do, but I just had asked for
Okay.
clarification on 37 and Powell acts on clarification for number 35. So we got clarification on both. They're both shalls. So now we'll start discussion on 35 before we move on to number 37.
Okay. Is the entirety of 37 a shall or just the part about the review the policy?
Just to review the policy.
Just to review the policy, okay.
Right.
Okay.
The others you can consider shoulds.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification too.
Okay, so we can go back to 35 for a vote.
Well, or conversation if anybody has any questions or comments on number 35 before we take a vote. Okay, so we're going to go to vote. I think Commissioner Malloy already voted. Thank you.
7 voted yes.
Okay, thank you. Number 37. And thank you, Kalia, for the clarification on whether the recommendation or the implementation is a shall. So the recommendation is that we shall review the managed choice policy for possible modification, restoration, or elimination.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I just wanted to share why that's kind of like a split, shall and should in one. It's because in the last 3 weeks, since this started becoming public, I have received so many reports, reviews, that you've done a lot of this work already. Now, I don't know that, so I don't want to say that you shall do all the task force and surveys. You've done a lot of this, so you may have a different approach that you want to take. And so that's why the should exists on how you do this. But the fact that you should do it is a shall, so to speak, on reviewing it. How you do that, I'm leaving that up to you, because once I started reading all the things you've already done on this matter, you may want to just build on what you've already done or do something different. I don't really want to get caught in the weeds on this one.
Well, thank you for that, because there has been an extensive amount of work that folks have done and previous board members and community members. President White, I see your hand is up. You're muted, President White.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say exactly what you just said, Commissioner LeBron, and acknowledge that Dr. Jallo has recognized that work has been done in this area. A lot of work has been done in this area. And so I appreciate that. So that allows that to sort of move into the should category, because we could actually probably take a lot of that work and make some stuff happen if we are committed to doing that. So thank you for acknowledging that. As a matter of fact, I think yesterday or at our previous meeting, I said I wanted to talk to you about some of that stuff like managed choice. And this was exactly the kind of movement on the recommendation that I was looking for. So thank you. Because I just didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
We don't have the time.
No,
we
I don't want to reinvent the wheel either, Ben. We can agree on that.
Yep.
Any other comments from anyone else before we move on to, okay. So voting is open now. It's a yes or a no on this one. Again, we shall review the policy, and then the evidence of implementation methods are shoulds, and we can use information we have.
We only have 5 votes.
Okay, let me make sure I voted.
Okay, now we have 7.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right, and the last one is number 40. We're done, you guys, after this one. So I have number 40 is that the district shall submit to the monitor an update. Oh, go ahead.
I do have one question though. I'm sorry, Commissioner LeBron. Number 39 says make sure. Is that one a should or a shall?
Y'all get tired.
I'm sorry. In the
Yeah, you know what, I'm leaning more towards a should on that one. I think that was my intention.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Jello, you just said earlier that all things special ed related should be, would
Are we on
be,
39? Yeah, I think that's
39.
part of.
well, I'm looking at 38, the
And
review.
30, yeah.
Oh, I
So
thought
that,
you asked me about 39, I'm sorry.
There's
Well-
38 and 39 is what.
Yeah, 38 and
Okay.
39. So 38 mentions special ed.
Anything with special ed is a shall.
Okay, but then
Okay, so I should-
39, Dr. Jallo, 39 mentions one paragraph for special education.
Special ed,
to
right.
enrollment.
Consider that a shall.
Okay.
Okay.
so
Okay.
are we ready to discuss 38 then?
Mhm.
Yeah, not yet. Give me 1 second, Willa. I'm trying to get clarification. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs for number 39 or bullet points, and only one that mentions special ed.
Right.
Are-
I'm only suggesting that the special ed one is a shall. The
Okay.
other ones are shoulds.
Okay, thank you for
Okay.
that clarification. And then, yes, we can start discussing 38. So Commissioner Powell, if you want to start.
So, Dr. Jello, I'd just ask you to elucidate. It says review of the services and accommodations, particularly need for transportation. Review to what end? I mean, once they're written, aren't we forced to wait for the annual review before we can actually require?
And this is maybe part of a bigger concern around, you know, those guidelines for special ed. How are people writing IEPs? How are we monitoring that whole process of writing, developing the IEP, conducting the meetings, monitoring the services, et cetera, et cetera. And what I mean by that, let's say you put transportation on an IEP. Is the child actually going to the school? Is the child actually attending? Is the child actually on the bus? Are we doing our due diligence in monitoring what's written on those IEPs after those IEPs are completed?
Okay, so I would have assumed that you meant something different than that.
Okay.
Because that's all, everything you just described is kind of out of our scope. All it does is give us information about the behavior of the child. I thought what you were trying to drive at was the reviewing what's actually granted to the child in an accommodation. And if the review happens after it's been published and sent to the family and approved, or if, and I know there's an approval process where the parents have buy-in.
Right.
So if those accommodations, including transportation, are offered before a review, then we're stuck delivering those services until the next annual review.
Right, and I'm not suggesting any.
Well, I'm actually suggesting that if there was a way to insert a review process before the IEP is and its accommodations is offered, so that some other set of eyes can look at it and say, this child does not need transportation. Yes, there's special ed, but the accommodations needed per guidelines that you think we should be writing, and I agree, that transportation should not be part of the accommodation offered in some cases, that's part of how we get control over cost.
So to be honest with you on this issue, I could not discern enough to say one way or the other. What I would like to do is have some kind of process set up, at least initially, to review written IEPs. Does every child who should get transportation? Let's look and review. Are there children who have similar circumstances or needs? One gets transportation, the other one doesn't. First, let's review what we're offering and what we're doing, and then look at other processes to help monitor. At the same time, look at processes that monitor the development of these IEPs, because I think we have a challenge there. I can't pinpoint exactly what the challenge is, but I do know that we're not monitoring the process the best way that we could to see what's going on with that development of those IEPs.
I hear what you're saying, but I have to confess, I feel like the recommendation falls way short of being helpful in the near term. If it said, if we were talking about stacking your recommendations and first we have guidelines, let's assume that we have guidelines. Wouldn't it be really effective to have a review, like a higher level review of IEPs to ensure that they conform to the guidelines before that accommodation is offered to the family?
Well, I would hope that that's part and parcel of the guidelines that are in that special ed manual that is being created, because earlier on in this process, I asked for a manual for the people who are writing IEPs and implementing IEPs. And then you need something for supervisors of how you're going to monitor instruction, how you're going to monitor the development of IEPs, how do supervisors monitor these processes. So, I mean, it could be given more rigor in terms of this recommendation. I'm open to it. I am concerned about the development of IEPs and the monitoring of the development of those individuals and of the products that they produce vis-a-vis an IEP. I think that that's an area for great improvement. And I think it's important because that IEP drives many, many things that impact the district academically and fiscally.
I think we're on the same page.
So I can go back and wordsmith it so it sounds a little stronger, but this is the foundation to a lot of things that the district should be monitoring with more aggressively. Put it that way.
So are we voting on this with the understanding that you will modify it and resubmit back to us or to Kalia to submit to us?
Yeah, I will. I can, yes, I'll make it a more concrete, a little bit more aggressive in its
Okay. So we're voting on it with that understanding, and then we could just take the vote now.
Okay. 7 yeses.
Thank you. So on that note, number 39 has one shall out of the recommendations, which is that we shall make sure that there is alignment with the process for enrollment and tuition for special education students at charter schools. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on this one or comments.
Didn't we recently get just such a report on the align? I mean, aren't we doing this already?
We are doing a charter report that will look at some of these things, but we're really focusing on enrollment and the impact of the enrollment and charters on our budget. I don't know if that report really, and we're going to be actually presenting that report next month. It's an every other month report that came out of the recommendation from the state auditors that we monitor what our enrollment numbers are and the impact of it on our budget, but I don't think it addresses anything specifically to tuition for special education in charter schools.
Well, I thought that's exactly what they were, that our staff were doing is essentially auditing the charter school invoices to make sure we were getting charged appropriately. I thought that's exactly Dr. Jallo, have you seen the report?
No, I have not. And so I don't know that it was going to be disaggregated by special ed or general ed, but certainly, you know, I think you want to disaggregate and look at special ed and look at the services that those students are getting and looking at tuition. I don't know if this report includes that.
Dr. Jallo, it's the report that we did go over it today in the previews, but in the 2 months ago, it's just presented as the enrollment numbers.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and the adjustments made every other month. So that's what the report is looking at, is what we're spending at charter schools based on the enrollment and where those enrollment numbers are at. Because that was something that the state monitor has asked for us to really keep an eye on, because the tight line on the budget and what we said we were going to spend in charters versus what we actually end up spending with charters. But I don't think that report, and nor was it in the state auditor's report, to look at the alignment and for enrollment and tuition for special education specifically. I think it was more just all students, what we're paying for all students and all charters and what our enrollment is. And if it's aligning with what we said it was going to be in our budget, and it hasn't been, and I don't think it will be, unfortunately.
So going a little further down that column, I have another question. The transition all food service responsibilities to charter schools. My understanding might be wrong, but I don't think so. The charter schools contract with us to provide food service, in which case, I don't know if we actually invoice them or subtract the cost from their tuition, but maybe Dr. Jallo, you can tell me what your understanding is and why that thing about food service is in here at all.
I think you have a mixed bag. Some do it, some are their own food authorities, and some pay us a fee for our services of offering food. What I'm suggesting is, although you may be getting a fee, I'm suggesting, why do we want to add to our labor? Why don't we concentrate our efforts on feeding the students in our schools and allowing the charters to do that work for themselves, as they are allowed to do, and as many of them do already in the district. It's just a matter of consolidation of our time and energy on our own schools, as opposed to doing above and beyond.
Well, the answer to that is really could be summed up in one sentence. They are public. They're publicly funded schools, and they are our kids, and we don't want them to go hungry.
No, don't misunderstand me. Wait, hold on. Do not misunderstand me. You have charter schools in this city, and some of them have decided and can easily become their own food authority. When they're their own food authority, they pick and choose the food that they want, and they feed their students, and they are funded, and there's no problem. It's just a matter of who gives them the food. It doesn't say that we let them starve or anything like that. It's a matter of, do we want to send our staff and take on the responsibility, or let the school take on the responsibility of themselves. There is no harm or less quality or amount of service to the charter if they do it for themselves, as many have chosen to do.
I understand what you're saying, but from a standpoint of economies of scale, you know, it doesn't necessarily cost us anything more to provide the meals for the charter school on a contract basis. That, you know, in fact, if it means that our food service personnel are more productive and then I'm not saying it's a profit center. It never will be, given the prices that we receive from the federal food school lunch program. But food service is, you know, is supposed to be self-balancing. And if it is, then what is the harm in contracting back to charter schools for food service? The argument that I articulated was the argument offered by our ops people for why we could and maybe should agree to a contract to provide food service if that is what the charter school wants. What your recommendation suggests is that we just cut them off and they have to figure out how they're going to do food service. What I'm saying is, when they embarked on being a charter school, they asked us if we would be their food service provider, and our ops people said, yeah, we can do this, and it's not going to harm our bottom line because food service is a self-balancing fund.
I have a meeting coming up with folks from state ed, the charter school representatives, to get a little more clarity on this. This was brought up to me just a few days ago, so I will be getting some more information and can bring it back. But there are some issues which the state shared with me relative to the way we deliver food services. So I just want to get clarity.
Well, obviously, if it's not truly cost neutral to us, or if we're failing to provide the proper quality in the food delivered or in the transfer of the food to the school or any other argument, then we shouldn't be doing it, and the charter school shouldn't be asking us to do it. But I don't know that it has a place in this recommendation.
So I just want to point out, though, that one is a should, and that could be further conversation after Dr. Meyer speaks with the state and gathers more information and has meetings with Dr. Jallo, but that's not a shall.
Right.
The only shall we're going to be voting on recommendation number 39 is to make sure that there's an alignment with the process for enrollment tuition for special education students at charter schools. So, and I guess I have a clarity question on that shall, Dr. Jallo, and how we show evidence of that alignment. And if you want that to be a point of interest to be added to the charter bi-monthly, every other month report that we're doing at the recommendation of the state auditors.
I think that would be the easiest way
Yeah, I think it could be added
to
there.
approach it, and
It just won't be added in the next week's one because we ran that report and there's some data points in there that we're going to be discussing. But we certainly 2 months from now can start it 2 months from now.
Right. I think that's the easiest, way to approach it.
I'm still confused because the first 3 bullets read, make sure. That sounds like shalls all the way down the line. Then the next bullet is transition all food service. That sounds like a shall.
Yeah.
Okay,
well, I think we
okay, all right.
clarified-
So you know what? I'll say it again. The only one that's a shall is special ed. If you want to
Yeah.
wordsmith it, we can wordsmith it. It is my intention and my belief and my expectation that the others are shoulds.
Okay,
Yeah, and I just wanted to say,
Yeah,
we did extra clarification on that one for number 39, because there was a number of them that do use similar language, but she said only special ed education is going to be shall. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and vote now. And Dr. Jallo, I did put a note to myself, and I'll follow up with Carlene as well. And I know Leslie's in the meeting and listening, but because we have our finance previews, ask her and her team to add that piece under that report, so that moving forward, that would be presented with the charter school enrollment report as a point of interest to meet this as evidence of implementation.
Okay.
So I'll take a vote on did we vote on number 38, Francine?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just on number 39, just for the one shall, which is related to enrollment tuition for special education students at charter schools. That's all we're voting on.
And we have 7 yeses.
All right, thank you. And the last one, which is number 40, there's no going back now. Any questions or comments related to number 40?
one request. In the language of the recommendation, it currently reads in the middle of the recommendations, do not exceed annual aggregate operating revenues. Could we add the word estimates so that it reads do not exceed annual aggregate operating revenue estimates?
Yes.
Thank you.
And can I just add the last two that you may not have in your copy? One I read before about the city. The other one is the district should engage the legislature in discussions to allow the district to be afforded the discounts available to member districts for BOCES services. Right now, you pay full price for BOCES services. And I'm recommending that you lobby your legislators to allow you to have the discounts that are afforded districts that are members of BOCES, so that you may not get the same discount as member districts, but at least can we engage in the conversation of being allowed to access those services at some level of discount.
Dr. Jallo, just for clarification, you're talking about the New York State legislators?
Right, you know, when you have your breakfast or whoever you need to talk to, that's something that the conversation begins. What steps will the district have to take, or to at least express that they may have an interest in pursuing that as a possible place to save monies for the district.
So you're not talking about commodity purchases, right? Because we already engage in commodity purchases. I don't think we pay a premium for that. Are you talking about services such as special ed student and voc ed student enrollment?
Yes.
Okay, that I could get behind, because quite frankly, not so much with special ed, but with the voc ed, we never used to be allowed to send our students to the BOCES voc ed programs because we weren't member districts and there's no mechanism to become mechanism. It was under John King that suddenly he just by edict, by fiat, said we had to send, I don't know, up to 60 students or 80 students. I can't remember the precise number, you know, as some kind of a educational equity thing. But I'm not sure that there's anything in the BOCES voc ed programs that we can't provide through our CTE programming. If there's anything, I would be surprised to learn that. But if it helped us get better rates for special ed service delivery, that would be worth the time and trouble to me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, BOCES offers a lot of services, and maybe, you know, it just requires some more investigation. There may be things that you never even thought to look at to have BOCES support you in, because you, as a district, don't think of yourselves as a member district. I'm just suggesting that the conversations begin, you start examining, and you may find that it's something you're of interest to look at various BOCES across the county or in other places. And you might want to take advantage of some of those things, those services, at a discount.
So I just have a clarifying question, because before us is number 40. Would that be a 41 and 42?
Yeah, I have a 40. On my copy, I have a 41 and 42. Yeah.
Okay, no, it's okay. So we'll vote on 40, and then 41 is the BOCES one, or?
41 is the BOCES one, and 42 was the city one.
Okay. So 41 and 42. So we'll vote for 40 now, and then vote for 41, which is the
Well,
BOCES.
these are shoulds, right? You know, these are
Oh, these are shoulds. Okay.
These are shoulds because it involves you going outside and talking to other entities about something you may want to do or may want to pursue.
So we don't have to vote on these, but there should.
Well, I don't think so, no.
Okay. The last one to vote on is number 40. I don't know if anybody has their hands up. If not, we'll start voting. I think some folks already started voting, so thank you. And Francine, just let us know.
We only have 6 responses. 6 yeses.
Okay. We'll take the 6 yes. We just
Now we have 7.
All right, thank you.
I know who that was, but I won't say. Madam Superintendent.
What's up?
I just want to, that concludes the meeting. That concludes the financial part of the state monitor's fiscal plan. I do want to suggest to the board that if you have suggestions or dates on when we can tackle the shoulds and have conversations as a board, for those, that we funnel those feedback, comments, conversations to Kalia. One of the suggestions that Dr. Myers had a few days ago, which I do like and agree with and would like the board to consider, is putting this in a Google Doc where we can all give a collective input that way. And then share it with Kalia, and Kalia can share it out with all of us. And then we can come to the meeting prepared to just have conversations on areas that we disagree with the shoulds, and focus on that. That way we can get through all the shoulds for both the academic and the fiscal plan. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to folks, but any suggestions, please send them to Kalia so she can then funnel them back to the full board. So I'm going to end the meeting. Do I have to do a motion to end or turn it back over to Van to end?
Yeah, I think because I chaired the meeting, you got to turn it back over to me. But
I'm going to turn it back over to you, Van. I'm out.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. I want to say you did a great job in chairing this meeting. Got a little bit of a rough start, but we got beyond it, and I think it was very productive. And again, I want to give credit to staff for coming up with a good format for getting us through. I want to thank Zoom for giving us the yes/no option, allowed us to make our way through it. Kaya, Rahima, and Francine, thank you very much for setting up that system. We can't thank you enough for doing that. And once again, thank you, Dr. Jallo, for taking the time and the diligence to go through this and giving us a format upon which we could have this kind of conversation. I realize, and I know my colleagues realize, there's much work to be done. This is a late night, but there's a lot more hours that have to be put into making this thing a reality. But again, thank you on behalf of the board for the work that you've done. So, all right. So is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
That's by
Second.
Commissioner Malloy. Seemed to be very anxious. I heard Vice President Elliott say
I
second.
have a social studies test I have to make, so. You know, yeah.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of adjourning, say good night. Good night.
Survey, survey.
Oh, survey. All right. Commissioner Malloy, you're going to have to wait just a few minutes to work on that exam. All right. Where did it go? Oh, there it is.
Oh, there's no way to go back. Okay.
Let us know we're all set, Kalia.
Sorry, I was muted. Only have, okay. I believe we are all set now.
All right. There was a motion by Commissioner Malloy, seconded by Vice President Elliott. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, ending the meeting, indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Good night.